Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 19th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of School Administrative District number 52 for 23-24 board year. We're going to start the meeting tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Bree.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, first order of business tonight is to act on our minutes from the 18th meeting. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, any feedback from those minutes? Seeing none, we will approve them by unanimous consent. And we'll start off, I'm actually going to omit my report from the board chair tonight. I think we've got plenty on the agenda. I don't want to take up more time than we need to, but we will then move into public comment. As always, I will just remind folks that our board meetings are conducted for the purpose of carrying out the official business of our schools. It's important to note that each meeting of the board is open to the public. However, they are not public forums. At each full meeting of the board, time is allocated to provide opportunities for citizens and employees to express opinions and concerns related to matters under consideration by the board. And these comments shall be within the guidelines set forth in our policy BEDH, that is public participation in board meetings. Copies of the policy are available on the district's website, and I would just like to highlight the following. The chair is responsible for recognizing all speakers. We ask that speakers identify themselves by sharing their name and town of residence. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes to express their views. Speakers should direct all comments to the board, specifically the board chair. This is an opportunity for the board to listen to the opinions of the public that relate to school and education matters. It is not intended to be a conversation or a debate of issues. We know that school-related issues can be emotional, but we ask that civility is maintained. We will not permit profanity, gossip, defamatory comments, shouting at one another, or comments that disparage or attack individuals or groups. And the board is faced with many important issues. So for the sake of efficiency, we also request that we discourage duplication or repetition of comments. The board will not permit complaints or allegations against staff members. We certainly care about these concerns, but they are personnel matters, which the board is not permitted to hear in public. If there are complaints against staff, these will be handled appropriately through our complaint policy, KE. To reiterate, this is just a highlight of key points. Please refer to policy BEDH for a complete description of the policy. So with that, is there anyone that would like to speak? Please.
I'm Marlene Aguilar. I'm a teacher at Levitt. Year 35 is coming up, I think. I have heard a couple of people repeatedly at these meetings who keep saying that there are inappropriate materials in our schools and nobody will do anything about it. That's just not the case. If you attended Levitt or MSAD52 schools, you know that's not the case. We have had a process to address materials that people object to. Few real objections have been presented, and none were ignored. We have a caring and responsive staff and admins. When something is brought to our attention, it's considered and reviewed. Books that people mention as an issue here often are not even books we have. Sometimes we have never heard of them. Now we have a rewritten policy that's been reviewed, discussed, and put forth. I've watched the process that included much thought, effort, research, as well as review and consideration of community input. An extra layer of oversight was added to the book selection policy. I urge the board to consider and pass this policy.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else interested to speak? Go ahead.
My name is Dominic Colson. I'm residence Green, Little Sawyer Road. I had Aguilar as a teacher, Miss Lashman. I had her as a librarian. Went to school here, and I don't like what I see. I can't. It breaks my heart to see that, you know, my girlfriend and I are about to have a kid, and about to see the stuff that I just saw. It just breaks my heart, and that's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
Crystal Nicholas from Green. I'm speaking tonight to respectfully share my simple request that you support our community's voices and adopt amendments that limit sexually explicit content in library materials. We all agree that consumption of pornography by children violates not only community standards and informed consent, but also current pediatric guidance. With this in mind, please note that the pattern that I have seen in the library books that I have researched is the frequent mention of pornography, as well as frequent exhortations and directions for minors to access it. Considering the pandemic of pornography addiction in our youth, can we afford to ignore this normalization and encouragement, inducement even, to engage in using porn that is pervading the books that our children are reading in school? And that morally challenged publishing houses are doing everything in their power to prevent parents from previewing these materials outside of outright purchase. When children see this content within the confines of their school library, they see this material as being safe to engage with. After all, why would a school library show children porn sites and tell them they should seek seclusion to truly enjoy the good stuff? Is this type of content age appropriate? At what age is it safe for children to be influenced and encouraged to seek out porn in adult sex platforms? Or is the vague and murky term age appropriate just another ministerial sleight of hand? And down the road a year or so, will standards be handed down where alphabet organizations declare that porn is a fun, sugary treat, so minors should be taught how to use it in the safety of public schools? School directors, please hear the voices of the public and respect the rights of parents. The weak confines of age appropriate will be farmed out for others to define, not us. We do not want our children exposed to advertisements or product placement for adult sex apps, adult sex toys, adult porn sites that include violent and demeaning content. Exhortations and encouragement that influences children to consume said sex apps, toys, and porn sites. Nor do we want our children to be exposed to library materials that seek to normalize these behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Ray Judd. I am a citizen at Leeds. I'm also a graduating senior at Levitt Area High School. I want to speak for any queer students sitting here today and those that come behind us. We are strong. I really hope that in the future our school grows and people become more educated about queer students. The prejudice that I and many others have faced has been disheartening. Walking through the halls day by day getting called slurs is exhausting. The declining mental health of queer students within this school is concerning. Our queer students come in excited for high school and are disappointed and hurt when they are constantly discriminated against. The spirit of queer students is declining. Every day I arrive at school scared for my life or my body. Teachers may be educated and respectful, yet students are hurtful. I hope for a day that we have queer education in this school because I want to be seen. We want to be seen. I don't want to be hurt. Nobody does. I love this town. I love where I live, yet I don't feel welcome. One day when I come back, I hope that will be different. Despite how depressing this speech may be, I want you to know people love you. It's hard being who you are, expressing yourself how you want. Don't give up that fight. Wear a dress. Put on makeup, look pretty, or bind your chest. You are here and you are real. Love who you want to love. If you are in a home where you can't be who you are, I want you to be safe. I love you. I hope you are safe. There are so many resources that you can go to. Outmain is a big one. Don't let others hold you back from being who you are, loving who you love. We are beautiful.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jimmy Childs, Leeds. If a student wanted to question staff about any of the obscene content in the books, what would you have the staff say? Even talking to students about things of sexual nature, isn't that against policy? See the predicament you put your staff in? I would argue that obscene content isn't anyway even allowed in public schools. I don't even think the board really should have the authority to say that it is. To go against other policies that say that it isn't allowed. You judge that all the time through apparel or whatever else on sexual content. How does anyone get to sidestep parents trying to safeguard their children? This 100% takes parental rights away from the parent. It was told that the stakeholders were to be heard on this matter. Well, they emailed you, they petitioned you, well over 500 people wanted their voice heard. They want policy alignment and their kids protected from obscene content, just like it says in other policies in the school. We're not asking for special protections, special rights for certain groups of people. Protection for everybody. We're not trying to take any books away from anybody, just maybe things that are sexual in nature. We would never take anything away from anybody. There's no First Amendment right for minor children to engage in obscenity. This one day will be adjudicated and the outcome will be just that. So May 30th, 2024, what position will you take on the matter of protecting kids from obscenity when the vote is cast? I urge my Leeds representatives to vote for the amendment Anthony Shostak is going to put forward. To stand with the majority and the 160 plus people in Leeds who did sign the petition. We want our kids protected. They have their whole adult life to figure out their sexual endeavors. Public school is just not the place for that. So, I thank you all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, hold on one second. We've got one in the back.
Cam Childs, Leeds, Maine, identifies as a man, boy, proud American, since that seems to be what we need to do these days. I went to the school district starting over 20 years ago and graduated in 2016, and boy, have things gone wrong. I'd like my child to come to school here when he's old enough, but it's time for a change. When I was coming through the district, starting in this very school here, and even as far as high school, I found myself suspended just for the mention of some of the things that are in these books these days. You guys want to get rid of bullying and harassment? Well, if you guys support these books and actively push your kids to be different and follow the propaganda these books teach, then your children need to be told it's wrong what they are seeing, learning, and acting upon. It's time to take back the older days of learning and stop getting with the modern popularities just to save face. If any of you think I'm being harsh or support books like Gender Queer as an example to be in the school districts, then you are what's wrong with the recent times, current times, and future, and our unfit parents. That is all I have. Have a great rest of your day, and the litter boxes in the bathrooms are full, so.
Thank you. Yes.
Judith Lashman, a citizen of Green, and I work at Levitt Area High School. I've not spoken at a school board meeting for some time in order to allow space for other people to express their opinions and concerns. However, I feel the need to speak in support of the selection policy that will be discussed and voted on later tonight. Over the past couple of years, everything I know and have been taught and learned as a librarian has been challenged in ways I never envisioned. I have spent my career learning, growing, and supporting students with every choice and decision I make. The books I purchase for the library are chosen with care, consideration, and thought for the students I work to support. I do not make these decisions lightly and use many years of knowledge and training to make professional and considered choices. The selection policy under consideration tonight has been carefully and thoughtfully drafted to address concerns of all stakeholders and to tighten some loopholes. It is a compromise of acknowledging the training and professionalism of the district librarians, as well as providing further scrutiny of materials before they are put into the collection. Having spent the past year working on, adapting, and working with this policy before the board tonight, I believe it will meet the needs of staff, students, and parents, as it allows us to use our knowledge and judgment while utilizing the professional resources available to us to choose the books and materials that will best support our students and the curriculum. I urge the board to pass both policy IJJL and IJJC.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Amber Brackett. I'm a citizen of Leeds. I've never spoken at a school board meeting. I did not write anything, sorry. 500 people in Leeds may have signed it, but that means 1,800 people did not sign it. And I think it's a very dangerous space to go to assume what our children are getting out of these materials. I think we need to be careful not to project our own interpretation onto what's going on in those children's minds. Education is power, and limiting education is dangerous. And most of the kids who will search out these materials are kids that can't get the education from the people that care about them. They're people that are scared and they need resources to help them. And limiting that would really be a disservice and very shameful in the eyes of education, in my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
I'm Crystal Whitmore. I am from Leeds, Maine, and I'm also a bus driver of almost 11 years for this district. And nobody's asking everyone to burn the books, to get rid of them out of the schools, different than getting rid of them out of the public. There's always open ways to get these materials for people who need them, but a public school is not the time and place for it, in my opinion. And when these kids take these books and they say, check them out of the library and bring them on my bus, and then they're taking them and viewing them to other students whose parents may or may not have said, I don't want my kids to do this, where does that put me? Kids aren't allowed to show people other things on their phone. We have to report it when they're flashing around pictures on their phone. If somebody brings a Playboy on my bus and I see it, I have to report it, and those kids are in trouble. This is the type of stuff that you're letting kids check out of the library. If I'm going to go into study hall or have someone go into study hall and one's reading these books and one's got a Playboy, who's going to get in trouble? I've seen the pictures. There's great stories in Playboy magazines that tell about people's stories and what they went through. Same with these books. But guess what? The Playboy person is going to get probably suspended, which is not fair. We can't have those in schools, so we shouldn't have things that are 18 plus type of material in public schools.
Anyone else? Did you speak earlier?
I did, but I
Yeah.
just got one more thing to
I'm
add.
sorry, yeah. Anyone else like to speak?
You kidding me?
Anyone?
So because no one wants to speak, I can't add anymore?
Everyone gets their turn, but I'm just seeing if there's anyone else that would like to
It
speak.
wasn't even 3 minutes.
Is there anyone else? Okay, I'll give you another minute.
So like, back in 2016, I would have gotten literally suspended for this stuff. I actually brought a Playboy on the bus when I was a kid. I got suspended for a week and a half. Because a little gay boy told on me. So how is that okay? What's that? What's that, Aguilar?
I said, oh my God.
Yeah, he's mine too.
I appreciate not having conversations. Yeah, yeah. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We're not used to Lord's name in vain in here either. Regular things.
I don't need-
Excuse me,
I don't need this.
please refrain from inciting a conversation with people across the room.
You're gonna tell her that Mr. Gardner's bill?
I am only going to remind you one more time that we do not want to have people in the audience getting into arguments in the middle of our board meeting. So please do not continue having a conversation with people across the room.
Okay, as long as it's fair for both sides, then that's fine with me.
So, anyone else wishing to speak? Just want to make sure. Okay, so let's move on. We are going to move on to communications. So I have no further communications. Superintendent Med, do you?
So I'm going to report the following resignations. Andrew Zott, a custodian, effective May 24th. Michelle Killinen, teacher at Leeds Central School, effective August 31st. And the following transfers: Melissa Newcomb, music teacher, transferring from a shared position between Turner Primary and Leeds to Tripp Middle School, effective for the next school year. And then Kaylee Rhines, who's a teacher here at Green in grade 4, is transferring to Turner Elementary School in grade 3, and again, that's for next year. And we have added one new sub for the middle school and the high school.
Okay, thank you. All right, there's a few adjustments to the agenda tonight. You'll see some of those highlighted in red on your packets. The first one being item 10.1, has been removed. The other one is,
Had you say the auditor was not feeling well, so we'll put the audit report on the next board meeting. So that's why it got removed.
so it should be item 6.2, I think, but it is basically the consideration and approval of curriculum and policy recommendations. Item 10.2.1. We're actually striking item 10.2.1 from the meeting tonight. That is a deletion of the current policy IJJ. We are going to essentially put that to next meeting and put it after an approval of a replacement before we try to get into a deletion of the current policy, so.
You don't want anything?
That will just be floating in
No
the
policy
breeze,
for
so.
2 weeks.
Yes, so we are just simply striking item 10.2.1 from the agenda tonight. And those are the adjustments as I know them. Anything further? Yeah. So we'll move into committee reports. Item 7.1, Crystal, Finance Committee.
We did not meet this evening. Our next meeting is June 13th at 5:30
Great.
in Leeds, right? Sure.
I'm not sure
I think,
where we
yes,
are.
Leeds.
Leave,
Thank you.
okay, good, because I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, all right. Plant, Transportation, and Building, Peter.
We did meet this evening. We discussed 2 items on our list of 3, so we have more to come in the future. We talked briefly about the Transportation Department and specifically the TPS pickup and drop-off. The Transportation Department is working with our school staff to try to improve that. One thing we did learn is that apparently we can train Turner, but it doesn't stick. So we need to retrain all the parents of Turner again. So just
I
a
won't
hint.
take that personally.
I was gonna say, you said that, not me.
The rest of the meeting was based around the Wright-Pierce amendments and for the wastewater treatment plant, the gift that does not stop giving. This must be an item coming later, or we're doing it now? So we will be making a recommendation later on to approve the $56,000 increase to their, our contract with them. This is primarily, well, we'll go into much more detail about it later. We're in hopes that some of the discussion we had might lead to not having to use all 56,000 of it, but most importantly, to keep the wastewater treatment plant on schedule to be replaced before it does fail. We decided as a subcommittee to continue moving forward with this. So that is it. Our next meeting, for those who want to attend, we would like to have you there. It is next Wednesday at 7 a.m. at Central Office.
Thursday.
I apologize, because Wednesday didn't work with Central. So it's next Thursday at 7 a.m. at Central Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll change that right now on my list.
Curriculum and Policy, Jamie?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know, but there's this policy on here called IJJ. that
What?
We'll be talking about later, so I just wanted to point that out, just in case anyone wasn't aware. No, but there's also, on the consent agenda, it's just a second reading of GBIA, which we approved the first meeting. It was a unanimous vote in committee. So just a reminder, that's on there as well.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to administrator reports. We're going to start off with the Green Central School Principal, Mr. Parker.
Good evening, everyone. As you probably have seen in your board report, there is a lot of stuff coming up at Green Central School. I'm just pleased to take a moment to share with you one additional event that did not make it on this calendar. But Monday, we're going to be visited by a ranger from Mission Working Dogs. He's a certified therapy dog. He will be here with his certified trainer, one of our parents, Brianna Bourgeois, and he'll be visiting. I think it's a great way to sort of wrap up the school year with the kids. Of course, Ranger's a golden retriever, the best breed of dog, just saying. And we're really looking forward to that experience for all of our kiddos. So that was the one piece at this point that did not make it on that very busy schedule. But does anybody have any questions?
I just do one. Behavior data seems to be up starting in February, kind of across? It does seem to be coming down, but I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, it is coming down. Yep, there are a number of factors there, including different students who may have joined us, kind of along during the school year. And we immediately, as quickly as we can, put various pieces in place to try to meet their needs.
Okay.
So, and you can see how the data does respond accordingly, so.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Have any of these behavior incidents required an evacuation of a classroom?
You mean any for the whole year?
Well, on this chart.
Well, it starts in September,
Right.
so sure, yes.
How many?
Don't have that information right now, I really have to take a look.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll move on to the Turner Elementary School principal, Ms. Levesque.
So one thing I wanted to highlight from my board report was the gold standard that the district received for our PBIS work that was done by Mallory Murphy, who's our instructional coach, but also our advanced tier PBIS coordinator at TES. And she is doing a program through Maine, which is a train the trainer to become a PBIS coach. And within that, she found out about this program and she thought that we would fit under the silver recognition, and they got back to her and said, actually, you're a gold star. So that was pretty neat. And a lot of the work the reason that we got that is because of the data review that we do as a district. And having district meetings that I know Teresa works on with Mallory. But specifically for TES, one of the things that has been really beneficial for us at looking at the data, we've made a huge push this year to make sure that if something's happening, we document it. And it can be something that isn't even a huge thing, because we're not using this data as a gotcha for those students necessarily, it's to help us improve. So if we can look at the data and say, it looks like there's a lot of learning in the classroom. When you have third graders, sometimes learning is something that just happens. But it's really important to think about school-wide, because that might be something that we need to work on. About remembering to raise our hands, follow our protocols, whatever it might be. So some of the areas that we've worked this year by looking at our data is some of the revisions about the way we do recess. So we looked at some of the problem areas that we're seeing at recess time and created zones instead. So teachers are responsible for zones, and they cover that area, and they have the expectations for the games, and they go over those with the kids. And that has been, it's been night and day with that change. Another major change has been that now teachers or the supervisor at recess takes out the gear. And the reason that's such a big deal is because sometimes we would have kids who would either bring their own gear, and then something would happen and they would get upset about it or mad. So we try to keep it to just our gear so we don't have that type of issue. And it also helps the kids kind of see like this is something that is being supervised. It's not just a free for all. So that was a little, small change, but it's made a huge difference. We've also been able to do more group intervention. So looking at the data, noticing that there's a group of boys who continuously are getting into trouble, and it might not be major trouble, but it's like a friendship thing. So they need just some social skills. We're seeing that a lot now with, and I don't want to blame COVID, but that time period where kids kind of miss out on those social skills that they need. So they have a hard time understanding, you don't need to tell someone if you don't want to be their friend anymore. Like, what else can you do instead? Like, how can you don't have to be friends with everyone, but how can we handle it in a kind way? So those have been some of the bigger things that we've done this year. And then we're redoing our entire schedule next year based on some of the data that we're seeing too.
Very good. We'll see how well we all do with controlling our blurting tonight as we move forward. Does anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
I'm just going to be thorough, so I'll ask everybody the same question. Did any of the behavior issues require evacuation of classrooms?
Yes.
Recently, or was this more toward the beginning of the year?
Honestly, when it's been happening, it's always been a student who has higher needs, so there's more going on with it. I don't have that number either, but it's usually students who have something else is going on for them, and they have another adult who's with them. Try to keep them in there as much as possible, but sometimes it becomes necessary to remove the entire class. And when we can catch it early, we can kind of do it in a fun way, like one thing, we're like, okay, so we're gonna go outside for an extra recess, because that student is having a really, really hard time, and having everyone in there isn't fair to those students or to that student either, so.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next on the agenda is the Levitt Area High School principal, but I believe Mr. Shaw is at a seniors event this evening.
Yes, he is. So he sent his report, but he's not here.
Great. Any questions you want to relay to Principal Shaw in his absence?
I would be interested to know, but I'm going
Evacuations?
to expect not.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I suspect it's pretty minimal, but I can't speak to that.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a very minor slash, would the schools give presentations regarding referrals per month? This one's not as bad, but I've seen them before, where just a quick glance at the charts, it's like, oh, there's a big, but I've noticed that almost every one of them, the numbers they use on one side is different. So when you try to compare the two schools briefly, it could look better. So it would be nice if the schools all use the same.
So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I had to adjust that and was going to point that out because I'm going to do a little bit of that work. But I think this is what the system produces, so I don't know if they can change that, but it is something for us to pay attention to.
You know,
Yeah, no,
pick a number
totally
on
get it.
the,
I was
the
noticing
axis
the
so
exact
that
same
when I
thing.
look at the two schools, it's just like,
Yep. I was
and does
noticing.
meant tonight was 5 and 4, but I don't know why the difference is there.
Yeah, yep.
All right. Anyone else before we move on? All right. So we'll move on to the Assistant Superintendent report. Ms. Gillis.
I am not going to report anything right now. I have a presentation, brief presentation later on ESEA.
Okay. Sounds good. So that moves us on to the Superintendent report. Ms. Med.
Yes, so a whole bunch of things. So last meeting, you approved accessing the technology reserve account for updating the wiring at TES. And I just need to report to you, all that is fine, but the information that Wally provided is slightly different with a new understanding. So the discount we receive by working with E-rate is based on our free and reduced lunch rate, right? So I think when Wally reported it, that we would be responsible for 30% of the project and 70% would be paid for through the project grant. That was based on our free and reduced lunch rate. But now that we don't have as many kids doing the free and reduced lunch forms and things like that, that number has dropped. I've been talking about that for a couple years. We've added the alternate economic form to make sure that we do have a proper accounting. But for grants like that, they don't allow us to use that alternate economic form data. They only allow us to use the free and reduced lunch data. So the number that I was working with, he was like, well, how many kids are, socioeconomically disadvantaged? And so I just pull up the number that includes the free and reduced lunch rate plus those alternate economic form. Turns out we can't do that. So we're going to be responsible for 40% instead of 30%. But he also was able to negotiate a reduction in the rate with the contractor that we're working with to do this application. Like, it's a complex process, so he was working with a contractor to do this, or a consultant, sorry. So it's really only going to be about $4,000 more difference, and Wally thinks he can identify funds within the budget to cover that difference. If he can't, we'll have to come back to you, but I just wanted to correct the information and explain why there was this complication. I just didn't ask enough questions about what he was needing it for. We can use that number for funding purposes only. It's to help us get more money in our subsidy. But that's the only way that socioeconomic number can be used. Super complicated, but that's the story. Questions on that? Like, I just wanted to make sure that we had the wrong information, but we think the amount of money that we asked for, you guys approved $33,689 from the tech reserve account. We think we're going to be fine with that. I just wanted you to know that there was a wrinkle. Okay, questions? All right. So I think we bought, were you gonna ask a question?
No, I was just gonna highlight these other things that I was hoping you were gonna go over.
Oh, yeah, I'm going, I'm not done. I got a second page.
Good.
We did buy our hydraulic bus. For those of you who are not on PTB, we did talk about that. We did purchase our hydraulic bus. We have it here. It was used, as Jim reported, within the first hour that it was on board. And again, a different type of brakes allows us to use a driver who doesn't have their air brakes endorsement, which we have one employee right now that has that. So a helpful way to assist with transportation. We have 4 new hires for you tonight, 3 at Turner Primary School. The first is Chelsea Fournier, who is going to be working in grade 1 next year. Chelsea was an ed tech, moved into a teacher position in January, and it was a 1-year only position. She was the one who took over when Lindsay Holst became the Dean of Students. So in this new round of applying, Chelsea was selected as a full-time sort of staff member, moving on to her first year. So she did a great job. I heard lots of good reports from Kim. Super proud of her moving into that role and really flourishing in it. And talking with her, it's been great. The second one is Deanna Wilkinson. She is coming to us from Winthrop. She has 13 years of experience, so we're super excited about that. And she lives in Turner, so we're super excited about that too, because she's going to be joining the community that she lives in the school that she's working in. So excellent references. The third, a guidance counselor, a unicorn, Maureen McDonald, is going to be joining Turner Primary as a school counselor. If you remember, Turner Primary has been without one for this year. She's got 5 years of experience. She's a career changer, though. She had her own business, whitewater rafting business, prior to becoming a school counselor. So it was really interesting talking to her about her life experiences. But excellent references coming from Winthrop as well. I think she and Deanna work together, if my understanding is correct. And then the final one, hiring at Leeds, is Danielle Allen. Danielle has been at Green this year and was one of the teachers who was not going to be returning because of the cut positions. So I'm really excited when I met with Danielle that she was going to be able to stay in the district. That was her goal. She got great references from Doug and did really well this year. She came to us with a couple years of experience already, so Danielle's going to be joining us at Leeds. Very excited. Then you've got some job descriptions. The office support assistant and administrative secretary. Those are old job descriptions that have been renewed. They hadn't been updated for a super long time, a good old decade. So some minor changes, really no significant review of them, but updating what their responsibilities are and being super clear with that. There are 2 new job descriptions, and these are both positions that were approved in the budget. The first is an office support assistant for the athletic department, middle school and high school. I think they're going to be doing interviews for that soon. So we started with the office support assistant, sort of generic job description, and then added some specific things that are athletic in nature. A lot of organizing, scheduling, like keeping track of things is really the big piece of this job. The second position is the special education building coordinator. Rebecca and I went back and forth a couple times in terms of what to name this. We have currently special ed team leaders at each building, and that is a stipend position. We were talking about this as like, okay, we need a full-time team leader position. But calling it the same thing as the stipended one just didn't feel right because people would be confused. Building coordinator, that title is used in other districts for this type of position. In this budget, we did not add any positions. We used positions, unfilled positions in the district to fund them. So there is one full-time building coordinator at the high school, and we are hiring and that's already hired. We're hiring a full-time coordinator to be shared between TES and TPS. But again, those were all positions within the budget. It is a new position. It wasn't a new, like, budgeted position. Okay, it was reused money. Does that make sense? So those are new. GBIA is on here. It was passed unanimously. If people don't remember their vote, I just wanted to make sure that you were, that's not a new one, and this one is the adoption. Then we have the financials that Crystal already mentioned. And then there is a superintendent authority to hire over the summer for new board members. This is an item that goes on the agenda every spring. During the school year when the board meets, you hire teachers, principals, and the superintendent. By law, that is what your duty is as a school board. So anytime we hire within the school year, they don't get on contract until the board votes. But when the board stops meeting in July and August, we have to keep moving. And so this vote allows me to offer them contracts, but you will ultimately hire them at the first board meeting in August. Kyle has asked me before, what if I don't like the people that you hired? I'm like, I don't know, you're gonna have to cross that bridge when you get to it. But nothing about our hiring process changes, like, you know, the requirements that we have for background checks, the requirements we have for reference checks, all those things will be the same. You just won't see those names until August. But if we don't offer them a contract, they can't resign, and then we can't bring people on board and be ready to go. So that is a normal thing that happens in all school districts for the time that the board is not meeting. And then the final thing is the contract extension for principals. When principals are hired, they get a 2-year contract. And then as the evaluation process goes, they are brought to the board. And again, principals are by law, you guys hire them, they're brought to the board for a contract extension. And so the principals that you see here are all, they have 1 year remaining on their contract, so you're extending that contract by a year. Again, this is sort of an annual thing. I think that's it.
That is good. Any questions for Superintendent Ned on her report? All right. So we'll move on to the consent agenda. Again, these items can be acted upon collectively unless someone makes a motion to act on one of them individually. Item 8.1 being the instructional nominations that were just read by Ms. Med, the Turner Primary School primary teacher, the Turner Primary School primary teacher assigned to grade 2, the Turner Primary School guidance counselor, the Leeds Central School primary teacher assigned to grade 2. Item 8.2, which is a review and adoption of the superintendent recommended job descriptions. Those were also just presented by Ms. Med here. 8.2.1, the office support assistant. 8.2.2, the administrative secretary. 8.2.3, the Leavitt Area High School and Tripp Middle School athletic office support assistant. 8.2.4, the special education building coordinator. We also have 8.3, which is the second reading and adoption of curriculum and policy committee recommendation of policy GBIA, staff participation in political activities. Again, this is the second reading and adoption. 8.4, the review and approval of finance committee recommendation of the March expenditure and operating reports. 8.5, as Ms. Med highlighted, is to authorize the superintendent of school to offer contracts and hire during the summer. And 8.6 is to act on the recommendation of the superintendent for principals contract extensions. So is there a motion to pull any of these items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Anthony?
So moved.
Seconded by Bree. All those in favor? It is unanimous. Okay. That will bring us to our new business again. Item 10.1, the audit has been removed from the agenda. Item 10.2.1 has also been removed from the agenda, which brings us to item 10.2.2, which is the first reading and acknowledgement of policy IJJC, selection of instructional materials, and IJJCE, citizens' request for reconsideration of instructional materials form. I think probably most appropriate to start off with a motion for that. Folks want to make a motion? Jamie, is there a second? By Crystal. So with that, we will start discussion, and I think it's probably most appropriate to start with an outline of it by superintendent on this policy.
I'm gonna get my computer fired up.
Sure.
so we can call it.
So just, I expect there to be a lot of interest in speaking about this tonight, and I want to make sure everyone at least gets their one chance to say their piece. So after this presentation by Superintendent Med, if there's any direct questions, let's ask those. But then I'd just like to go around and have everyone at least get one turn in of their thoughts on this before we kind of open it up to a more general discussion, as is typical, if that makes sense, folks. Go ahead, Gary.
Tried to find the best location, so I realized it's kind of behind, but there really wasn't a better place when I got here. So this is actually, IJJ currently covers both the library and instructional materials that are used in classrooms for curriculum. So this revision proposes to split those two policies, primarily because what happens in classrooms, there's a little bit more sort of, because it's not voluntary, if I am a parent who wants to remove my child from particular instructional pieces, as a former high school principal, most often it was a particular unit within a health class around sex education. I wouldn't want my student in there. We have a policy, IMBB, that allows a parent to pull a child from that. IMBB doesn't have anything to do with the library because the library is voluntary. So it seemed to make sense also because I want to just be clear that what is purchased for the library is not the same as what's purchased for curriculum, because curriculum is used in all classrooms and a student may not have a choice with that. So the process is a little bit different. So there is, so that is sort of, I took IJJ and then edited it for the curriculum part and edited it for the library part, okay? I think one thing that's super important in this is there's a specific part here around the classroom text collection. So the elementary classroom and then English classrooms in the middle school and high school are most likely, elementary classrooms are filled with books, as I'm sure if you've ever been in one, you know. It's really important to understand that that collection is subject to the same criteria and the same policy as curriculum that we purchase, instructional materials that we purchase and deliver to all teachers to give, like a textbook or something like that. That's currently already there, but I think part of this is going to have us sort of really reiterate that with teachers and make sure that they're clear. So I think that's an important piece that was briefly mentioned in the policy, but it really wasn't highlighted, and I thought it was important to do that teachers really need to be mindful of that. So in terms of instruction materials, the board is responsible for approving curriculum, and then we purchase materials to implement that curriculum. And so that's sort of like just this statement here just recognizes that difference. You're not going to look at every single book we buy for an English class or anything like that, but you will be approving what that curriculum is for the instructional materials that we purchase for it. Criteria for selection is very similar to the library. This criteria selection is the same now. The edits that were made for curriculum materials, instructional materials, is the same as the edits that were made for the library. So the two things that have changed in the selection criteria is a reference to age levels, and this G, which is a brand new, present a balance of opposing sides of controversial issues to enable students to develop a capability for critical analysis. So critical analysis was sort of laid in here under F. We pulled that out and really emphasized that in G. That wasn't really a big emphasis in the current policy, and based on feedback from the community and from board members, it seemed like that was an important thing to emphasize. Selection procedure is very different, and in fact, we're doing that right now for looking at reading material for the elementary level. This is really done typically by teams of teachers sort of looking at materials and making decisions based on research that indicates the efficacy of it, how effective a curriculum materials may be, or what the learning results say, and whether or not those materials we purchase help us to meet that, and what the curriculum says. And so it made reference to the library. We've taken that out, and it says instructional materials. What was not in the current policy when it comes to instructional materials was reference to relevant research. There's lots of places for us to go to give us feedback on whether or not there's been research on the efficacy of a certain reading program, for example, or a math program. And so this really emphasizes that we need to, when that research is available, we need to consult it and make sure that what we're purchasing is backed by research in terms of, does it actually help kids learn and grow and achieve? Again, anytime you see a cross out of collection and circulation, those are library terms. So those were simply replaced with curriculum or classroom materials. Donated materials, this is not any different. If somebody wants to donate materials, it has to follow the same policy. So we can't take donated materials that don't fit the selection criteria or wouldn't fit the procedure by which we're going to purchase materials, for example. Staff purchased and provided materials have to follow the same. So I may have a set of books at home and I'm going to bring them in. It has to follow the same one. So again, there's not some other way to have materials be in the building without following this process. Inspection materials. So what's not here is the opt-out, because the opt-out is really a different process. So it's just crossed out there and it's down here. But a parent has the right to request and inspect instructional materials that are being used, crossed out things that reference the library because that's in the other proposed new policy. Restricting access to student materials. This is a different process because we have a whole separate policy for that, IMDb. Last year we developed an opt-out process for parents who wanted to identify particular texts in the library that they didn't want their children to check out. That doesn't apply to this part because they have a policy already that allows them to do that. So we needed to make a difference between there. The reconsideration process is mostly the same with a couple of differences. So one, I know one of the big feedback we got around the current policy, which talks about a book challenge, is the adversarial nature of that, and sort of feeling like if somebody's questioning materials, why is it referred to as a challenge or a book ban? So we've changed that into a reconsideration process, which seems to make sense. That is what people are doing. Like, you know what, I have questions about this, I'd like you to reconsider it. That's really what the process is now, which is a little bit more collaborative. And a lot of the process is the same. So I'm going to talk through it a little bit. Let's see, not really much there. So big changes come as we get into that. The current process, when we went through this last year, not a ton of guidance in there in terms of, you know, what's the report from the committee and at what point in this process can people agree, you know what, we're going to remove that. Like that, all of that information wasn't really there in the current policy. And as somebody who was looking at some materials at the end of the year, really struggled with the fact that the policy wasn't really clear on there. It didn't provide guidance of what the role of administration was in that. So what we've done is sort of almost rewritten this entire part to make it much more clear, to try and not have it be so adversarial. So in the first part, and again, this is almost all the same in the library with a couple of changes. So the complainant, the person who's got the complaint, who's asking for the reconsideration, communicates their concern to the person providing material. In this policy, that's likely going to be a teacher because it's instructional materials, so it's not the librarian here. So if I'm having kids read a book in my class and I'm an English teacher and I have a parent saying, like, I want to reconsider that book, I don't think kids should be reading that in class. So that's who they address it to. The complainant meets with staff member and administration and the assistant superintendent at a mutually agreed upon time for the purpose of an initial reconsideration, right? And I think what's important here is that it clearly says if all parties determine that the instructional material should remain in the curriculum or be removed or relocated to a different building, then the reconsideration of instructional materials process concludes and the material remains or is removed, or, you know what I mean? Like, it clearly says if that group of people meet and sort of have this agreement, at that point, process is over. There's nothing else that has to happen, and the administration has the authority of whatever that agreement was. So I think that's an important piece, because none of that is really present in the current policy, and was a gap in my mind in terms of being able to take action a little bit earlier if there was some agreement around that. So if the complainant's not satisfied with that initial meeting and they want to do that, then they go to the reconsideration form, and that's the form that we remember sort of from last year's challenge of the book. That form still exists. It's now a reconsideration form as opposed to a challenge form. They provide it to the administrator of that building. One thing that is in throughout this process are timelines. There are no timelines in the current policy. So this sort of just says, like, if you're not happy with the meeting, you've got 10 business days to sort of like make that known, fill out the form, do something. That helps sort of move the process along. It helps us sort of like know that it's concluded. They're not gonna, you know, they have nothing else to say about it. So it's sort of that we can all know. They know what their timeline is, we know what the timeline is, and it helps with that. If the person doesn't submit it within 10 days, then we're all done. We'll assume that whatever concerns they still have, they're not so large that they want to continue with the process. If they do complete that, then there's timelines in here for creating a committee. Within 20 business days, superintendent shall convene a committee. For instruction materials, it's a little bit different. There's an administrator, the assistant superintendent, a classroom teacher, a department head of content, grade level leader, somebody who's got some kind of responsibility around this particular subject, if it's math, science, whatever. And an individual who's a content expert but not an employee. So some kind of outside. In the library side, it's community members, but on the curriculum instructional material side, it's somebody who knows something about the instruction of ELA, or the instruction of math, or the instruction of science. Somebody that can offer sort of an outside perspective. Because when we get into instructional materials, curriculum, it's a little more, sometimes it can be super technical, and we might need that outside voice to help us. So that would be this, and then that committee has, it only includes those members. They work to finalize report within 3 months. So again, there's a timeline. Once they're in place, they have 3 months to do their work. They will consult with the superintendent if they need an extension. Only one review committee at a time per school. That was put in just to make sure that we didn't have multiple committees happening at the same time. There's a limit to sort of how much, if that should ever happen, to preserve the energy of the staff. So the committee reviews the material. They provide, this is new, the complainant, the person who's asking for the reconsideration, actually is invited to that committee to be able to share their concerns. That's not part of the current policy. So again, I think encouraging conversation as much as possible is sort of the goal. Let's see, committee members, the committee reviews the material in light of the selection criteria and the procedures for selecting it. And then there's guidance on what should be in the report, because there was no guidance on what that report should be. So it would be the majority recommendation, any individual committee members who want to offer their own perspective, an analysis of the application of the criteria, so why do you think it belongs or doesn't belong, and the committee can recommend to maintain, remove, or relocate to a different grade level the instructional material. If there's no, and they provide that to the superintendent, if there's no appeal to the recommendation, so let's say the committee decides, you know what, we're not going to have this book in freshman English. If the complainant doesn't say anything, if there's no appeal, then it's over and the book is removed. The material is removed. So again, at each level, there is this opportunity for whatever decision was made to have it enacted. If the person is not happy, then they have it appealed. And again, there's a 10-day window for notification that, you know what, I'm still not happy, I still think it shouldn't be there. So again, there's a 10-day notice, and then if it then is appealed, that's when it comes to the board. That process is still the same in terms of where it starts and where it ends. The hearing has a little bit different. There's an opportunity for the person who is asking for that reconsideration to present to the board. That was not part of the process that we had last year. So it gives that person an opportunity up to 30 minutes to have their say and try and explain to the board why they have the continued concerns. A member of the review committee can then present their recommendations up to 30 minutes. We did have that part. If you remember, Evan presented that, but there was not that part for the person who was filing the reconsideration. And then board members obviously can weigh in and ask questions of either the complainant or the review committee. And then the board material in question, the board will review objectively in its full content and review in light of the selection criteria. There were two things that we took out because they seemed like they would already show up in these other two. So evaluate in terms of needs and interests of students, school, curriculum, and community, and then consider in light of differing opinions. Since the selection criteria sort of touches on both of those, we didn't think those two things were necessary. So it is reviewing it in its full content and then in light of the criteria. And then again, more timelines. So the board decides what to do, 15 business days to notify the complainant of the outcome. And then we did put in, and this was a suggestion from Anthony at the last committee meeting, in both policies, that there be sort of like a timeline for when that material or book in the library side could be reconsidered again. And we chose 3 years because that's how long all your terms are, so it's possible that in 3 years this would be a turnover and a different board might see it differently. The other thing that would trigger that would make it less than 3 years is if you revise the policy, so that the policy is now different, which would make a reconsideration potentially come out with a different outcome. There's a form, there's very little change on the form. We changed the title, I don't know, there's like very little change. It's pretty much the same. We put in the new full selection criteria. I think we took out a reference to what did you find great about the material, because we sort of were like, oh, why are we asking people that? Like, I'm not getting anything from it. So there's not a lot of change in that particular form that goes with this policy.
Okay. Are there any immediate questions for the superintendent on what you presented before we go around the table? Yes, Jamie.
I just have a quick question, and I know I've been doing this work for like 9 months now and just thought of this. Under selection of instructional materials on page 1, the very last line, we haven't really ever done this before, and so I'm wondering what it might look like on your end. So it says the superintendent is expected to keep the board informed about educational materials purchased for the school unit. I feel like that's something that the board would be interested, and so I'm wondering how you foresee that going.
So that's in the current policy. So yeah. I feel like if there's, if we decide to purchase new materials for curriculum implementation, and we're actually in that process now because we received a grant from the state to update our reading materials, instructional materials at the elementary level. So that would be part of Teresa's report, would be that sort of like notifying you of that. Whether or not, I don't think it's likely that I would notify you of individual books that an English teacher bought, like a new title for one class. That seems to be a level of detail that I probably wouldn't report. So I think it would depend on sort of how much of that, if the English department decided they were going to revise all of the 9th grade curriculum and focus on memoirs as like a big piece of the freshman curriculum, that would likely get reported, but in individual text I can't imagine that would be reported.
But you would have that information if the board wanted it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And if I couldn't whip it out of my head, we would get it, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Great. So I'll start off and then we'll go around the table with Bree, concluding with Anthony. And again, if you don't have any initial thoughts, you don't have to speak initially. I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance up front. And I'll say that I just want to remind folks that this discussion we're having here is about the instructional materials and curriculum-based materials, not the library materials. That Superintendent Knight was clear on that. But I also wanted to just kind of address a couple of points that I've heard kind of throughout this process. One is that it's taken a long time. And I think if we think about when we initially made the recommendation to the policy committee, it was, I think it was over a year ago when that was originally happened. I think it was a summer in there. Eventually we did get this onto the policy subcommittee, and then we've taken probably 6 months or so to move this through the subcommittee. And I just, I think this has taken a long time because of its interest in the community and because of its importance. And I think that we wanted to make sure this was thorough. And I think that it also brings me to another point that I feel there's been some criticism that we have not been listening to the public. And I think that it's almost the opposite. We've been listening for a long time. We've been had a very lengthy public comment period. We've been listening to folks bring their comment to us at our meetings for a very long time. And I think that, particularly with, the citizens petition that was circulated, over 500 people signed that. There's obviously a strong drive to have our current policy be changed. And I think we took that very seriously through this process. And I think through the work in the policy subcommittee, as well as by the superintendent and our staff and administration, we've taken a very thorough approach to receiving that public feedback and making updates and revisions. And I think this policy has addressed, as best as we could, all of the comment that has been received throughout that process. And I think it's been substantially revised. So with that, I'll conclude and open up the floor to Bruce.
In regards to IJJC, speaking specifically about the selection of curriculum materials, I appreciate the addition on page 2, if you need to follow along, of that we are presenting a balance of opposing sides of controversial issues to enable students to develop a capability for critical analysis. And I also appreciate that when looking and considering curriculum materials, this is across the district for all content areas, that we are using relevant research to make sure that the curriculum that we are selecting is going to be effective and up to date for our students. As an educator myself, I do this. I go through having to do and select new curriculum for the school district where I work at, and research it changes and it updates regularly. So when we are looking at purchasing and selecting new material, I think it's extremely important that we are following the most up-to-date research. So I really do appreciate that we've added that piece in, because education needs to be based on the most recent reliable research that we have available to us at that time, and take out textbooks and older materials that are out of date. And so as far as this new policy goes, I think that's very strong, and I especially appreciate those pieces being added in. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the restricting student access procedure, but again, I feel like we've done a really good job with really tightening that up and adding in steps and procedures and making a more robust committee to be able to put more eyes onto the materials should that be needed in the future.
Thank you. Ashley, would you like to go?
Yeah, I think one is a really great idea to separate the two policies. I think that's going to ease some concerns. generally, the largest one that I hear, people either reach out to me or stop me at the local garden place when they recognize me is, you know, the big term, sexually explicit content. That's a big one. And I think it's easier for parents to identify if they feel that's happening in a classroom, because they have more control over it than versus a library where they may not know what's there. I would hope most parents do have more knowledge of what their kid is doing in the classroom. There's a little more control on there, and my only thought was on determining age levels of who's making that determination, whether it's in a committee or a teacher, or are we basing that on, you know, the publishers or the creators' guidelines, and who's you know, that could look different from publisher to publisher, from, you know, supplier to supplier. And, you know, how is that going to really ease people's concern that material like that isn't a little more defined and targeting that?
Do you have a quick answer for that, or would you like to think about it?
No, I think, and then I'll ask Teresa actually to weigh in as well. I mean, because there are specific learning standards at each grade level, and it says grade 1, and then these are the standards, grade 2, these are the standards. There's a lot more guidance around what's being taught at each grade, and so what materials belong with that. So we have more guidance in that way. We're not sort of, it's not a voluntary process of like whatever we think kids might be interested in, you know, sort of like a general research project. It's more around, these are the standards we have to meet, so what materials do we need to provide students so they can meet those standards? So it's just a very different, it's a very different process, so it makes the age piece a little bit less ambiguous. Do you want to add to that?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
You have more, Ashley, or anything else?
Yes, I'd say generally speaking, this policy, you know, the difference from looking at library materials, this one for anyone kind of listening in, is that there's more, overall, there's more structure around what goes into a classroom than what goes into a library.
Jamie?
Yeah, I told Carrie that I sometimes forget that, like, her and I have been in this for 9 months, and Anthony and Bree, so I'm like burnt out a little bit of talking about it. No, but I think it's a really strong policy. Carrie did such a great job when she came to us and, you know, presented the idea of separating out the two. Like Ashley said, you know, I thought that, like, okay, this is a great idea because they are so different. You know, policy making is hard. It's taken us a long time to get here. It can be a slow process sometimes. And sometimes I think the lines get blurred as to what is and is not policy. And without being on a policy committee where you're doing that work, as a board member, it's taken me 2 years to kind of understand what it is and isn't. And so I found this like kind of diagram, and I just kind of want to go over it. So, you know, the board makes a policy, and then the superintendent implements and administers that policy. We hire and fire the superintendent, and they are our only employee. So the board makes a policy that gives the superintendent direction, and clear direction, but it also provides flexibility for her to hand that down to her administrators. And a policy is not meant to micromanage what our superintendent and administrators do, because if a board was going to get that specific in policy, then the superintendent wouldn't be able to do her job. But I've been thinking about this because I know that one of the things we talked about and that Carrie put into this policy is those checks and balances along the way, where you no longer just have, you know, the teacher or just the admin purchasing these books, and so there's no check or balance to that. It puts multiple people behind that. So now, you know, you have the teacher, other teachers within the school district that teach the same subject, and the administrator and the superintendent. So multiple levels of checks and balances. And I think sometimes we forget that there's also 9 other people that are checks and balances, and there are 9 other people that are elected by their towns by a majority vote. So if at any point a board feels like the superintendent is not doing their job and enacting a policy that we put in place, then we have the ability to change that and to do that since the superintendent's our only employee. So I think that's important to remember, that the power of the board can be strong. And we're trusting our superintendent to implement these policies. And if they're not implementing them in a way that we think is strong, then we're allowed to do something about that. So I just don't want the community to forget that either, that there's 9 representatives here that can also do something about that. So other than that, I think you did an awesome job, Carrie. And I'm proud of the work we did in committee, and as far as this policy goes, I think it's great.
Right. Thank you, Jamie. Do you like to go, Kyle?
I don't really have a lot to say about the IJJC, other than that I appreciate you guys actually separating it. I want to commend you guys for, Anthony and Bree and Joe and Carrie and everybody that's been a part of it. And, putting together a lot of effort, because I know it's a tiring process. But I do, agree with Ashley on the fact that like the age thing does kind of curious on that. Like, and I think that's a good description on what Carrie just said about the, about the age, the standards, side of things. But I do like to hear the other feedback on it and what other people think about it. Since I haven't really been a part of the whole process, I don't hear a lot of it since we're in committee meetings the whole time. So
It's busy sometimes. Peter.
Yes, and I do appreciate that the subcommittee has been working for this a long time, and we hear blurbs about it coming in here and out and so forth. And unfortunately, this is now the point where we now, as a whole committee, it's scary to think, but almost it's a start afresh now, because now we're moving forward. Overall, with this particular, especially around curriculum, I appreciate almost all the changes made to it. Just leads me, I just had a couple questions in regards to it. First and foremost, I'm really, really pleased with the addition of G with the present a balance and opposing of the sides. But my concern when it comes to that is an awesome sentence. How do we have any sort of enforcement to that? That is my concern. What are we using as a checklist? That is a great sentence in this, and as we're looking through subject matter or curriculum going, that seems like a balanced view, but do we have any sort of curriculum, is there any sort of checklist when we do this to say, okay, yeah, no, this is giving this view, but does it actually give access to this other side point, whether it be a historical facts or whatever you want it? And so that's my concern, because I see a real opportunity here for this to just be a great wording, but no real change in action. So I don't see any changes we can do it at this point, but something I'm really concerned about and really want to monitor, that this might be something we have to go back and review to make sure that we are offering a diverse viewpoint and both sides of issues that some of us in this room might think there's only one side to it. Why would everybody think there's a second side? But that's not our duty. Our duty is to offer both sides and let the child or student come forward. The second question I would just have, and it comes back to it made a lot of sense in one of your previous and some of the things, you have very strict time to make things happen. On page 3, under the parents, where parental questions and they wish to monitor it and so forth, unless I'm overlooking it, a parent can make a request, but I see no sort of time frame where it has to be addressed. And that just leads me to a little bit of a concern that, okay, a parent might bring up and so there's nothing to enforce. If that couldn't take a month or 2 months, I understand it probably will never will, but just thinking that is a place to maybe I might have some concern about, that if a parent comes to a teacher and say, I don't really like this, can we talk about it? To me, that 10-day thing or something along those lines ought to go into place to make sure that it's addressed prior to it might happening in the classroom.
Peter, can you clarify, are you talking about the inspection? of
Inspection by
materials?
parent, yeah, the parental right kind of aspect of this would be the parent's ability to review material. And if they, so that, to me, unless I'm overlooking it, that would take place under the inspection of materials if you wish. And so if a parent looks at the materials and says, I don't really agree with this, what you're coming forth with, there's nothing here to say a time frame and actually moving forward with that discussion.
So there's two questions in there, Carrie. I don't know if you want to try to jump on those now, or if you want to take a few
Yeah,
minutes.
so actually Teresa and I are just sort of like, Teresa says, I can tag in on that. So
Okay,
I'm gonna let Teresa talk about the diversity, the question around the
Yeah, no, I
opposing
answer, yeah,
viewpoints.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the question, and as Carrie mentioned, we are currently working to select instructional materials for ELA. And at the start, before we even looked at any of the materials and had samples and online access, the team that consisted of the instructional coaches, the grade level leaders from pre-K to 6, and all 4 elementary principals, as well as myself, we created a criteria to evaluate the materials. And here are some of the questions, some of the pieces that we were looking for. Materials are varied and engaging for students and represent various authors and characters, perspectives, lifestyles, and backgrounds. The program incorporates technology effectively to enhance learning without relying solely on digital platforms. The program is flexible and meets the needs of diverse learners. The program allows for some autonomy. So those are some of the pieces that we were looking for, so that, for example, if we are purchasing particular books, that it shows a wide variety of types of books, nonfiction, fiction, that there are at the appropriate reading level for the students, but that they do look for differing viewpoints and differing perspectives.
Because that last part was what I was, the sentence that.
Right.
And that's what because my concern is a lot of the time, we might not even consider there is a second viewpoint because it just makes sense to all of us, but, we ought to at least give the student the option to see the side that we completely disagree with.
And then I think you're referring to, in the instructional materials, the timeline that's there, it's just a reasonable time, but that's not very clear, right? So I've underlined it. It doesn't, there's not a timeline. It says reasonable. I think I would say a month is unreasonable. That's not reasonable. 2 weeks is probably reasonable. It depends on what they're asking for too, though, right?
And I understand, but it just,
Yeah, so, but I hear you. It says reasonable time, but it's not.
I can assure you the person
specific.
asking, there is no, it's like
Yeah.
2 days, and,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
there has to be,
Right.
if you have a given,
Right.
then
So you have to-
everybody's more comfortable if you have a given number, like,
Yeah.
okay,
So we just have to balance, like, we can't ask a teacher to drop everything they're doing, right?
Okay.
And to put this all together, but
I very
the
much understand.
question about the reasonable time, yes, you're gonna get in trouble. So, yeah,
That's very common.
yeah.
I'm all set, thank you.
All right, Alex.
Yeah, so I won't rehash what I kind of agree with, but I want to echo what Ashley said and what Peter said. Splitting it up, I think is totally appropriate. This day and age, to have the previous policy lump everything together, it's undeniable that this is a better way to do it. I agree with Ashley about the kind of ambiguity about the age levels. I do think in this regard with the curriculum, it's easier to get behind, or not get behind, but kind of forget about the ambiguity, because in theory you're talking about kids who are in one class, are all of an age level that in theory would be taken into consideration when you're picking material. I appreciate the timelines that were put into place, especially when you have a parent who's involved. I think it's important to let them know that there's certain steps that are going to be followed, in terms of when things are going to be done. But as Pete and I overlooked, but the first step, not having kind of a more structured timeline, maybe is, inappropriate and should be clarified a little bit, just because if you get 6 weeks into it and you feel like you haven't been heard, then the timeline down the road at that point becomes less important to you because you're already kind of been disenfranchised. Besides that, I think there's a lot of good. You know, the layers of review are, like I said, only good in relation to the policy proposal. So that's all I've got.
Thanks so much. Crystal?
Thank you. Thank you for the work. I love what everybody said about separating the two out. I think that's very important. It feels up to date to me and not archaic. The part that Peter was just discussing about the timeline about inspection of materials, the thing that popped into my mind was puberty discussions. And I believe we received like a permission slip was brought home. And if you did have questions about that material, I can't remember like the dates between when I got that permission slip and when that actual discussion was going to take place. But given the climate and what people might want to review, I think that having some sort of 7 days or, you know, something to that effect, if people wish to review that material, would be nice. And the other part was on page 4 of 6, the superintendent will notify the board. And this is like at the very beginning when we're going to have the reconsideration. I think that's just notifying us that something is going to be reconsidered, but then I feel like there's a couple of steps before we might hear back again, and that's at the appeal thing. I just want to make sure that we hear back like at some point where along the lines that something was resolved and how it was resolved. I may have missed it. It's
Can you show, where's the first time it says the superintendent's going to notify you? We're on page 4, right?
Yep, on page, 4 of 6 on the new C. At the end of the paragraph, the superintendent will notify the board.
So if somebody actually files a reconsideration?
Correct.
Okay.
Which you would anyway.
Yep.
But then we kind of have some new steps that could happen.
Okay.
And then the next time we hear anything is if there's an appeal. So just kind of letting us know what occurs. Yeah. But other than that, I'm pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Anthony?
So I know we're not supposed to engage in repetition, but I do want to say thank you for all of your hard work on this. It really is apparent that a lot of work went into it. I am the sole person who dissented from recommending this policy to the board, so I obviously have issues with it. More than 500 people in our community signed their names to a document that said, in light of the many options parents and guardians have outside of the district's schools to introduce their child or children to content they deem appropriate for their child's age and maturity, and mindful of our community's limited capacity to provide financial support to our schools, we urge the district to prioritize inclusion of quality educational materials suitable for the district's educational goals that are worthwhile for the intellectual and cultural growth of students, but that do not contain obscene, vulgar, sexually explicit, or sexually suggestive content. We also urge the district to adopt a fairer, less confrontational challenge process that gives the challengers some influence over the composition of the review committee. So they asked for 2 things, and they kind of got one. And so I'm going to have to make some amendments to this, and I hope that they will be accepted. No one has been able to explain to me satisfactorily what the pedagogical value is of obscenity. Obscenity is defined legally, and I know that you all know this, but I have to repeat it, as something that a reasonable person applying local contemporary community standards would find to be prurient, to be offensive, which is weird that it can be both of those things at the same time, but that's just what the legal standard is, and to have no serious literary, artistic, scientific, so on value. If it doesn't have those things, if it does not have value, why is it that we cannot simply set that aside? I do not understand. It is such a simple gesture to the people of this community who have been patient and who have tried to remain respectful. When it comes to the composition of the review committee, I do appreciate that there are now 2 community members that are on that committee, but there is no mechanism for the requester or the complainant to have any influence over who those people are.
I just want to, the 2 community members would be on the library committee, the review, not this current policy.
I understand. I understand.
Okay.
I understand. So, so they have 0 influence over this committee. So I think those are problems, and I hope that we can solve them, and I hope that we can do it in a streamlined fashion. I do not understand any resistance to taking obscenity and just saying, yeah, you know what, this community doesn't want that, we don't need it. The state allows it, but we do not. So I will not make my amendments yet. You have not had a chance to speak.
I'll say, I went first, but I was going to just reiterate a couple things. I just want to reiterate that this is the first reading and acknowledgement of this policy. A vote on this motion that's on the floor right now is not approving the policy on the floor. Okay? It's just acknowledging that we've considered it at this meeting. But as Anthony suggested, this is the right time to talk about amendments. Okay? Because the goal being that we can talk about amendments tonight, and hopefully, if amendments are successful or not, you know, it would be something we could bring before us at the next meeting. And so the next meeting on the 13th, if we acknowledge tonight, we could hopefully be getting to a place of approval. So I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. So with that, I'm going to open the floor, Anthony, and if you want to start off by proposing an amendment, feel free.
If I can have a question first. With regard to the selection criteria, I noticed that you added the word "or" on item K. And I'm sorry, I only just noticed this. So it seems to me that "or" potentially negates A through K.
So I actually muddled on this for a while because there was no "or" before. And I'm like, well, how can anything meet all of those? So that was the challenge that I had in my head. The current selection criteria, I was like, how can it be, how could anything that we purchase meet all of those? I understand exactly what you're saying, like that "or" seems to say that you don't have to follow anything as long as it's cheap. And that's not the intent. It's absolutely not the intent. But it felt like there was an and like I don't know how any piece of material could be that. So I didn't know how to deal with that, and that's what I did. It's been there the whole time. I understand you're just seeing it, but it just seemed a little like absurd that we would be expecting anything to meet all of that. I totally get what you're saying. So, but that's what I wrestled with.
I think the word "should" is the out. The instructional materials should. It's not a requirement, and I think that that's fine. But I do think that the "or" does, it's just a little weird, and I think it should be "shall be affordable."
But it's the "and." It says "and," so if the "and" stays, do you interpret that meaning like that the whole list is required?
Could they not?
No, everything above L, if L said shall be affordable, and everything above it is a should, then it's, I think it's implied that you tick as many of those as you can.
Okay.
But, I mean, that's just,
I have no, that's fine, like, this was me wrestling and not knowing how to deal with it,
So to clarify, Anthony, you're saying take out the and altogether, because it's a list. And you
no,
know
I'm saying take
lists.
out the or.
So
So
replace
take
the
out the
or
or,
with a
keep
shall.
the and.
Take out the or, and, shall I make my amendments?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Say it clearly.
So,
Confused.
I move to amend this so that we strike the word or from K. We add shall be in front of what will soon be M, and L be reworded to state shall be free of obscene, sexually explicit, or pervasively vulgar content.
Do you have that written down?
I-
Or could you just repeat the last part, I guess?
Sure.
Sorry, Joe, I should have waited.
Yeah, no, I can hand this out to you, so just,
So, do you mind if I read what I've got so far to make sure that it's accurate?
sure.
Okay. To amend policy IJJC as presented so that the word or is struck from letter K, and I can reference the page number. Add shall be in front of L, shall be affordable, and be free from obscene, sexually explicit, or pervasively vulgar content.
Almost.
Okay,
So what is now L becomes M.
okay.
So you want be affordable to be last?
Yes.
Is everyone clear on the amendment proposed? Is there a second for that amendment? Seconded by Kyle. So discussion on the amendment. Again, this is specifically now discussion on the amendment, not on the greater policy. Go ahead, Anthony.
So I do want to take a moment to assure everyone that if they look at the wording of this, it does not discriminate against viewpoints. We can have curriculum that deals with any subject, including sex. We're just saying that there's a limit to the granularity with which we depict it. So, anyone who is concerned about groups who might be experiencing marginalization should feel comfortable that this policy will not exclude anything about them. It is not intended to. I would not support anything that did. All it's doing is it's saying that there is a level of detail that society recognizes in a lot of ways and has for a long time. There's a level of detail for which young children are simply unprepared. The fact that we have reports of increasing addiction to pornography suggests that this is absolutely true. That young minds are too easily captivated by that level of detail. So I think that this would still, thank you, this would still allow for a robust curriculum in health that deals with all kinds of aspects of human sexuality, reproduction. That by sexually explicit, we are saying the kind of material that would elevate something to an X rating back in the day, an NC-17 today, not merely a discussion of a sexual act, but a gratuitous level of detail. And thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Okay. Yes, Jamie.
So I guess my question for you, Anthony, would be, you know, you say there's a level of detail that's not appropriate, so I guess my question is just, so what is that level of detail?
Well, so I asked this question in a slightly different way to the members of the committee by email yesterday, day before, when I wanted to know exactly what was meant by in consideration of age. And so I wanted to know at what age a particular act is acceptable, a depiction of a particular act. And I didn't really get any answer. So what I would say is that it goes back to the same kind of test as the Miller test, which is what would the local community, what would a reasonable person using local community standards say this is sexually explicit? And all of the feedback that I have had is if it's the kind of thing that my kid can see in an R-rated movie, that's fine. So I think that puts a pretty clear line on it. When you start getting into the description of the copiousness, the texture, the smell of bodily fluids in a gratuitous way, not a way like, this is a science class, you know? You kind of have to talk about things. That is absolutely not what this community is talking about. And if a work were challenged, if part of the curriculum were challenged, and this is an important thing. Sometimes I think everybody thinks, wow, you know, a reconsideration, challenge in the old days, I have to catch myself from using that word. It's terrible. We have to avoid these. And, you know, they're onerous, they do take time. But that doesn't mean that all fights are not worth, you know, that all fights have to be walked away from. There are fights that are worth fighting. And if we have good curriculum that we are confident of, that comes right up to the edge of this line, and people from the community say, you know, somebody from the community says, no, that's over the line, then we take that challenge, or that reconsideration, sorry. And we affirm the curriculum. When we say, no, you know what, this really doesn't meet that standard. We're sorry. There is nothing wrong with doing that. You kind of have to accept that that's going to be inevitable at some point. And having the opportunity to say that, no, we are local people. We are the community. We are looking at this with the same kind of standards that everyone else in Turner Green and Leeds do. And our opinion is it really does fit our community's standards. And if they don't like it, they can vote us out. You know, that's how that works. But I don't think that that's going to be the case. Because that's really not what the folks who I have spoken with are talking about. They're talking about egregious, gratuitous depictions. That's it.
My question would lean towards the balance of the curriculum committee, because I know that this amendment or proposals was discussed there. So I'm curious on the reasons why it was, specifically these three definitions would not be included, or you think would cause an issue to picking a curriculum.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
I'm not on the committee, but I sat in on all the meetings. And I'll say that I was expecting this coming on the library policy. I was not necessarily expecting this on the curriculum side of things. And I think in those meetings, the majority of the discussion at the subcommittee meetings was talking about this in relation to those, the library policy. So I don't know if you had anything more you wanted to add there, but generally it was focused more on the library side of things on this particular topic.
Well, then that would still lend towards the idea of what would be the downfall on the curriculum aspect that this would cause, which is clearly the concern.
Well, I understand.
Yeah, so, you know, this was obviously talked about at length And, you know, the biggest thing that came out of the committee was just the subjectivity of those words. So it really leans towards what I just asked Anthony. What level of detail? How do we define that level of detail? And what level of detail one person might find comfortable with their child learning about, somebody else may not feel comfortable with that. And so who makes that determination and how do they make that determination? What we're doing right now is putting all of that on the superintendent to say, you know, or in this case, it would be on the classroom teachers to say, your material has to be free of obscene, sexually explicit, or vulgar content. And that teacher then has to look at these books and say, is that sexually explicit or isn't it? And if I do put it in my curriculum, am I breaking the policy? So we really need a clear definition of what that is. And, you know, when we were sitting at the committee kind of talking about this amongst ourselves, I just remember thinking to myself, if the six of us, there were six of us sitting at the table, if the six of us can sit here for an hour and a half arguing about what the definition of sexually explicit is and what materials would or would not be considered sexually explicit, then how can we expect one teacher to be able to make that subjective determination? So there's no legal definition of sexually explicit or vulgar content. Like Anthony said, there is a legal definition for obscene. So I worry, and we talked about this in committee, that putting subjective words like sexually explicit or vulgar content would put the district at risk because there's no legal definition of that. So how do you define what that content is? And is it fair to put that impetus on a teacher to make that decision? And Carrie can probably weigh more in on this because she talked to legal counsel as well.
So Peter asked the committee, Ashley, we'll get to you in just a minute. So I don't know, Bree, if you want to add.
So in regards to a reason why not adding that particular language to this new policy is, again, I'm going to go back to this is curriculum. And when you're looking at curriculum, it's already built in. The companies, the programs are already built in around the standards. And the standards are set up in such a way that it's not going to include that material to begin with. But for example, our main learning results standards specifically around health, and one reason why I don't feel we need to go into adding in more language than we need to because it's already part of the curriculum. For example, the standard for health, the first standard, is health literate students comprehend concepts related to health promotion and disease prevention to enhance health. The first, performance expectation, won't go into details to help you understand standards, but standard number 1 and then standard 1.1, okay? Students analyze the impact of complex health issues on personal health related to healthy sexuality, nutrition, safety and injury prevention, and substance use prevention. It's a big standard. But in order to do that, we have to have that balance of those different controversial ideas of what is healthy sexuality. And I get back to the question that Anthony's saying, like how much, how descriptive, but where do we allow then the students to have those conversations, to be able to talk about those controversial issues, and again, the scientific research behind it to reflect a high quality scholarship for them to learn, especially when we're talking as we get more into the upper grades with middle and high school, for them to then be able to say, and hopefully, as it says here, going on to the others, right, to prevent some of these unhealthy habits in sexual everything, right? So how then, where do they have those conversations? Where do they learn what is safe when it comes to sexual practices and what is considered unsafe? And so if we start to add in some of these other words and terms and languages, we are going to block that instruction. And then students are going to be having unhealthy sexual activities because they aren't having a place to be able to say, oh, I never knew that. You're shaking your head no, and that's okay, we can agree to disagree on this, but I can tell you that there are many kids who are learning it elsewhere, practicing it elsewhere. As a high school teacher, who was a teacher who, I'm not gonna say any names of any students obviously, but like, had a lot of trust with my students, and they would come and speak to me about certain things. They are practicing it because no one else is telling them, do you really think that's safe? Do you really think what your behavior that you're doing is safe? Whether it's that, whether it's substance abuse, whatever it may be, if they don't have the teachers in the school and a curriculum around for them to be able to carry on with all these things and stimulate growth and factual knowledge, as is already there, that is fine, nobody has a problem with that. We want to present the facts and provide them a chance to have that critical analysis. If we start to add in more additional language, we're going to take away a block. We are blocking A through K then, in that sense.
So this started with your question, Peter. I don't know if that was answering what you were looking for or not.
I have some follow-up on it, but I'm going to let other people, because I'll get my mind, because I wrote down a couple notes, but I know that a couple other people raised their hands, so I'll let them go first.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, so I guess maybe feedback from Carrie on it, if there, is open-mindedness or the ability to further expand on that definition, set thresholds from bullet points of what makes something sexually explicit, that kind of, I guess, makes as a compromise, or if there's a carve-out for a health education class that has to be done to meet legal standards for that. But I also feel as though that's probably already being done by a lot of teachers, and having it something written down a little more definitively isn't going to impede them, because as the email you sent the board yesterday, answering Anthony's question about books that, at the high school that were denied by the principal, and you listed his reasonings for denying those, one of those reasonings was overly sexually explicit. So that tells me that there is precedence, and with at least one of our principals does have criteria that they're using to define what is sexually explicit. And so I think that tells me that there is a possibility to further expand on what that means. What criteria did Mr. Shaw use to say this particular book is sexually explicit? Is he found something in there that triggered that for him? Could that be further expanded to make that word not so vague if there was a definition added to it?
Sure. If you like it, sure.
I think that where the majority of the revisions have gone in the policy, and again, most of the work went in the library, because what happens in the classroom is a very different setting, right? Students can't, they have to go to class. So a decision a teacher makes is going to be different than books that are available for voluntary use, right? So I just want to be clear on that. And so those criteria that Mr. Shaw was using was related to library, right? So I think the concern that I have with sexually explicit is, and I'm going to piggyback off what Bree said, any kind of definition I've seen involves a sex act. If there's a description of a sex act, that's sexually explicit. In my mind, that seems to make sense. I don't know how we teach health if we can't discuss, kids can't use materials that describe a sexual activity. I don't know how we teach human anatomy without drawings, without material that provides them. And I know, Anthony, you said to me that there's a way to do this, but I honestly don't. I've racked my brain in terms of how I could guide principals who then can guide teachers around this. And I think the only thing that I've been able to really do is two things. One, I think the most important part of both of these policy revisions is about broadening the team of people who are reviewing materials. Because the broader that team is, the more likely you are to get a lot of different opinions about it, right? And the library selection, and again, we're not there yet, but we're mixing them. the way the policy was working, it sort of unfairly burdened the librarian to make that decision all by themselves. And so curriculum items already sort of have a team because teachers are always working together to decide what materials. So in my mind, that's where I put the focus, because the definitions of these terms are so vague. I honestly would err on the side of caution, because I would not want to put principals and teachers in a position of being challenged on that. And I say that actually not in the reconsideration place. I actually mean like somebody saying this is sexually explicit, you're not allowed to have this. But in fact, one, maybe the other person doesn't think it's sexually explicit, or maybe it is a part of the curriculum. I don't see how my advice to the board to keep ourselves sort of like making sure that we're not violating students' rights to information, that we are providing materials that align with the learning results that are the required pieces. That's not the required curriculum, but it is the required things that kids are supposed to engage in and learn about. I don't see how we do that with those words in there. Obscene is the one word that has a legal definition, which Amy said. And I just will remind for the board members who were here last winter, when we did do previously known as a book challenge, we got a legal opinion that that book was not considered legally obscene. So we can put obscene in here, but that wouldn't have changed the outcome of that, because we don't have obscene material. We have material that people don't like, 100%. We're in agreement, right? That is welcome to America, right? Like, we see this in our own community. We have things that people don't like, but that's not the same thing as illegal, obscene. That is a different conversation, and that's why both of these policies focus on broadening that team of people who are weighing in, because that community standard, when you have a broader group of people, you're more likely to have those different views on whether or not something is appropriate for the school or not, appropriate for the library or not. So that's why all the energy went into the procedure part, and not into words that I think potentially would put the board in a risky place, sort of legally.
Seeing no hands, I'm just going to jump in myself for a second, and I'll come right to you, Alex. I would also, again, this is the first reading and acknowledgement. That amendment on the floor would be a very specific worded amendment. I would suggest that if we're going to move forward with something like that, that before we actually make it an official part of the motion, that we might want to seek some kind of review or legal counsel on that before actually enacting that word. So I think if it would be possible, if this amendment is going to move forward, I would suggest not in its current form, but in a way that could leave that flexible for a legal opinion in between now and the next meeting, in a way that we could perhaps get more feedback on the implication of some of those things, as opposed to just approving it out of hand right now. So I'll go through this.
Yeah, no, we talk about the subjective nature of Anthony's proposal, but we do already in letter D, we have 3 or 4 other qualifiers that are subjective. That is those, the varied interests, abilities, age levels, maturity levels. There's no static, this is this is that. So we already do make allowances for, the teacher, the administrator, or the review board, if it gets to that. There's already human element. There's subjective, discussion that has to take place. So that aspect of Anthony's wording is, it shouldn't scare you away, I wouldn't think, because we already have that wording in there. I do think Anthony's proposal maybe is better suited for the library side, because I think you would hate to have something get in the way of appropriate educational material, but I also don't think appropriate educational material would get struck down if it was brought up to review. Common sense does have to apply at some point, and I would agree that I would hesitate to put the board in a spot, like you had just said, of legally of being, you know, in a box. So I mean, I would probably favor at least reviewing the legality of at least the word obscene, because that's the only one that has legal definition. But the subjective nature of it, it's completely unavoidable, no matter how we do this, I think.
Did you want to?
There's a little bit of a language difference between the two, though, that I think is important. So I just want to, for D, it says take into consideration, right? So we've got 30 kids in front of us. You know, who are those kids? Where are they from? Like, what are their interests? We got snowboarders here. We got, I mean, that's, you know, that's the kind of thing teachers are doing, right? Shall be free of is very, very different. That is a command. That is a, like, shall be free. So that is not optional. So that is a very different sort of like requirement. So I think it is, the language is important.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Just a couple points that have popped up to me. One, I completely agree when it comes to curriculum, what you said earlier. But the other part to this, and if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that classroom libraries are a part of this particular policy. Not, so that puts into account all of the book selections and so forth that are solely at the designate of the teacher under this guidance with possible review if they're seen. I don't believe that a teacher, unlike what, if we move forward with the next policy, unfortunately the librarian has to go through, a teacher's own classroom library doesn't have to go through even as strict with the principal looking at it. If I'm not mistaken from looking at this. So that's just an area that there are two different things we're looking at in this policy. One is the curriculum, which I have always had concerns about, and not so much with this particular wording, the whole balanced aspect, which we still don't fix, but at least we address. But then there is when it comes to this particular thing, is the classroom libraries themselves, what's available in the classroom for the students to take out. So I guess I can see where there is some potential, I don't know how to say it, but there's an option there for a mistake to happen. A loophole, thank you. And I do not want to completely curtail the ability of the teachers and the administration to make decisions on bringing in books and to start significantly being worried about bringing in every single book there is out there. I'm not necessarily against the words being suggested, but I do believe that them as a downright requirement might take it one step too far. And I wrote down before she even meant it, before Carrie mentioned it, the possibility that it might take a little bit of the bite out of the words if we do at least make it a suggestion. Just like up here in D, where it says take into consideration, then maybe put the same general guideline with take into consideration the obscenity, the vulgarity, the sexual explicit, so that it does give an option to understand that, yeah, there is going to be an amount of that. Unfortunately, that's the world we're growing up in. But there is going to be an amount of that up there, but this will give at least some acknowledgement that, okay, you at least got to think about it. So that's just a thought that it might make it a little bit easier to work with the school district.
Sorry, I'm not sure who's first.
I will,
You want to go?
Jamie wants to go first, that's fine.
Well, I just want to address the selection process of a classroom library. So it has to go through the same exact selection criteria as this. So they can't just purchase any book and bring it. It still has to be reviewed by professional staff. They have to consult with staff from the appropriate department before they bring it in. And they have to personally review the material, obtain recommendations and reviews regarding the material from reputable sources, and look at relevant research. So all of those things still have to pertain to their own classroom library as well. So multiple eyes will also be on every book they bring in, and I'm assuming that if this policy is enacted, then our superintendent and admins will let those teachers know that it still has to be a pretty stringent process before something's allowed in the classroom library as well.
A couple of points. One, I'd like to remind everybody that they're free to amend my amendments. So, Peter, if you wanted to strike that word, you're certainly free to. To respond to Bree's comment about how we would be completely hamstringing our curriculum. One would think, if that were true, that all of my classmates from high school would long be dead from syphilis and gonorrhea. We did not have sexually explicit health classes. We didn't. We covered diseases, including AIDS. We talked about ways to safeguard against it. We talked about all kinds of sexual practices. And we survived. So I'm sorry, I understand your concern, but that's just hyperbole. It is absolutely not the case. Furthermore, and I'm sorry, I find this frustrating. I was going to talk about this during the library materials, but it's germane to this. We spoke about the concern about, look, if you put this in, we're not going to be able to have John Irving in the library. We're not going to be able to have the kite run. And so I read some of those, and I came back and I said, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about egregious, gratuitous, sexually explicit content. And then I said, I've got examples. We can talk and look at those examples, and I was told, oh no, we know what you mean. We don't have to see that. We don't have to go there. If you know what I mean, don't then turn around, please. Don't turn around and say, I don't really know what you mean. It's too subjective. You've said that you know what I mean. I have said pretty plainly, this is what I mean. I think that you should have sufficient guidance to talk to your high school principals and say, or others, and say, this is what the board said. They said, is it X-rated? That's what they mean. So I understand your concern. I do not want to have the children from this district have an incomplete health education class, have literature that does not delve into age-appropriate material, which in high school will almost certainly include some depictions of sex. They will. It does not have to go into the kind of detail that you simply would not find in quality literature. So anyway, I've said my piece.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Again, I just want you to define what you mean by X-rated.
Okay, you asked for it. So there's a difference between describing Jenny and Bill went on a date, and Jenny reported that she gave Bill a blowjob. That strikes me as rated R at best. Then if we get into the kind of detail, which I will stop now if you want me to, but if you get into the kind of detail where you're talking about how she's sliding her tongue all along his shaft to the point where he's beginning to shudder, and then stuff comes out all over her face, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Have I made myself clear? I'm sorry, I didn't want to have to do this.
I don't think that tone's necessary.
Well, I don't appreciate having to go to this level either.
Jamie, go ahead and finish your thought without trying to engage.
So, again, I'm not sure if what you are describing would not be rated R. And in which case, how would you then tell our librarian or our teachers, hey, if it would be in an X-rated movie, then it shouldn't be in the classroom? But I guess my real question would be, if it is hard to say what is going to be X-rated, R-rated, NC-17 rated, and then expect our administrators and teachers to apply that when I asked you to define what X-rated was, and the only way you could define it was to give me a graphic example. But I need criteria that our administrators and teachers can follow.
I would like to take you up, Anthony, on the proposing an amendment to the amendment idea. I think I continue to be hung up on some of the words in line M that is part of the amendment. Words like vulgar, I think, can be very, very subjective. I even think, like we were just talking about, sexually explicit can be objective. But I do feel confident that we've got to a place where obscene and obscenity is a pretty well-established term. And I would like to propose that the amendment strikes the M proposed in the amendment and adds language to the effect of shall not be obscene or shall not contain obscenity. But before that is officially adopted, I would like it to be reviewed by legal counsel for a more precise wording, because I would not want to have something like this have implications that we don't understand. So my amendment to this is to strike M and refer to legal counsel a language such as shall be free of obscenity, and hopefully get a response back from legal counsel before our next meeting to consider on the second reading. Is there a second to that? Jamie? Further discussion around my amendment to the amendment? Yes.
So I think it was Carrie who mentioned genderqueer when it was brought up for review. I guess my thought with obscene is if genderqueer and legal counsel said it did not qualify as obscene, I guess I would have a hard time restricting the amendment to only include that wording, because I don't know how that does not qualify as obscene. And I understand the legality of it, it's an opinion. But that would be my thought, is that being the hot topic book that, again, we're mixing the two policies, but that being the one that most people are aware of, I would assume. Not reaching that level, I guess, that would be my reservation, would be putting that behind in a legal box where you take out the ability for the human back and forth.
Before you go, Gary, I just want to highlight, it wasn't just a legal opinion.
Sure.
It was also a review committee.
Right,
as well as the school board itself.
No, I understand that.
All determined that it was not obscene.
Yep.
So.
But like I said, I guess if that's the level, if obscene is here and genderqueer is here, I guess personally I would have a hard time supporting that distinction.
So I think what's super important is, and I think I'll go back to what Jamie said around policy and the purpose of policy. So the board has to create policies to make sure that we follow the law, and we do what we're supposed to do with students, and that we're doing it in a way that's legal and constitutional. And then we have to apply that policy in a manner that's legal and constitutional, right? So I think what's really important to understand is that we cannot write, there is no legal way, and I think it's important to get legal counsel, but I am very confident there is no legal way to write a policy that will remove a particular book that people might want to remove.
No.
No, I think it's just really important. There's no way to write a policy to remove particular point of view or a particular topic. Like, there's just not a way to legally do it. What we can do, and I've said this, I'm going to say it again because I think this is the legal and constitutional way to do this, is to have that broader scope of people looking at what we're purchasing and what we're putting in. But to design a policy that would particular, and I think, Alex, having said what you said, I think it's even more important for me to say this out loud because my responsibility is to make sure that the board doesn't put itself in legal jeopardy. Writing a policy to target a particular book is going to be unconstitutional.
Oh, yeah, and that's not.
So I think, right, no. So, but I just think if that's where people are trying to get to, you're going to be disappointed. Like, there really isn't going to be a way to legally do it. I'm very confident of that, and I want to make sure that we just stay focused on that, and that procedure and having multiple eyes and having lots of people look at things is the way to manage that for us.
I guess, so my only point would be that that legal box kind of removes the ability to discuss it. So that's why I would have reservations for that. So I would be in favor of maybe taking out of.
I understand what
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
So you have to consider vulgarity.
No, yes. Let me just clarify if it's okay. If that went there, just because something is determined to be not obscene doesn't mean it may not meet the rest of the selection criteria. Sure. So I think it's important, like if obscene ended up on this list, it's not a pass.
No.
As long as we decide it's not obscene. If it doesn't meet other criteria, then it still could be removed. It still could be reconsidered.
Yeah, I just would hate for the legality of it or not to be a crutch, I guess. I think discussion is inevitable and probably the only way to somewhat appease both sides.
Ashley, you had one or two.
Yeah, my only thought with the term obscene and materials that have been challenged in the past is I don't know as though on the challenge on a form, but just speaking with particular parents, if they were necessarily challenged due to being obscene versus they were challenged due to the thought that they were sexually explicit. So two different phrases, two different sort of meanings. So the parents, are kind of looking at that term when they're challenging materials, not necessarily the term obscene, and the thought is, how to prevent material that is deemed to be at that level, not necessarily the term obscene.
So the board had asked specifically for a legal opinion on whether or not the book was pornographic or obscene. So that's why it came up. Yeah.
Thank you.
I myself am going to completely take the opposing view to Carrie, in the mindset that that is the opinion of that lawyer. So I take it as far as that goes. He has a little more, probably a few more classes in that particular area, but it is our determination to make our decisions as best as we can, following the guide of the law, and determine what our community wants us to pursue, and then let the chips fall where they may, as best we can, as long as we're doing what we feel is right, best for the community. Not saying that we shouldn't talk to lawyers, but I try to do it as little as possible, and we'll see what happens. So that's just my opinion. I don't know that I'm afraid that a lawyer's always going to tell you, I'm not a big fan of going down that route or making it a requirement. And with that being said, I'm still a little bit nervous with the idea of making the definition of obscene being mandatory. Because I believe in the wording of the second amendment to the amendment, or however we want to word it. It did go into the similar wording of it has to not be by the definition of obscene, correct?
Yeah, I think the point of the amendment is to include obscenity and obscene in the selection criteria as a negative, but to get guidance from council on precisely how that should be worded. And we can obviously massage that as we would move towards the second reading, because it, like you said, it is an opinion that we can take advice from.
Because
yeah.
I like the idea of putting in there something for, not a downright restriction, but putting in there something as requiring to think or evaluate or guidance towards obscenity, and even including the vulgarity and sexually explicit, just using them as making sure it's part of the thought process to say, okay, well, because you're right, there is no, and to each one of us here, there is a definition in our mind of what is sexually explicit. And I agree with Jamie completely, and I'll oppose Anthony in the sense that the description earlier, 20 years ago was rated X. Right now, it's almost rated PG, from what I've seen on TV. So that's just a concern. So it's a question on how it's all viewed. So I think it's questionable, but I think it still should be taken into account to a point. So I'm not exactly sure where it should go, but I don't like necessarily getting rid of all those words completely, and there's probably even more out there than those three. But anyways,
okay.
Just some
Anthony?
I think Kyle's.
Kyle, sorry.
I just wanted to, just a comment that I did, Peter brought up on D, which was adding, instead of using what Anthony's proposing for the M, but actually bringing in those words taking into consideration those varied interests, sexuality and obscenity and vulgarness, and leave it in that line. I think it still leaves it open enough to be able to consider that instead of just having a hard line where it boxes in. I don't know, but I just think that makes a little bit more sense in the way that we're talking about it, I guess.
So, if I can, I'll ask you all to do a thought experiment. Let's just say that our students and our faculty are restricted to using their computers for their lessons. Maybe it's another pandemic, and we've all gone to remote learning. Our policy on the use of computers states, and this is pretty unequivocal, that our staff are restricted from any use involving materials that are obscene, pornographic, sexually explicit, or sexually suggestive. That's a lot more vague than what I'm discussing. We're not talking about sexually suggestive, we're talking about sexually explicit. That's existing policy. So if we have a curriculum that is sexually explicit, we can't use it. Our students cannot write sexually explicit content on their machines. Our teachers cannot provide students PDFs of material that is sexually explicit. They can't have a Zoom call where they're dealing with this material. How are we going to reconcile that?
I want to go too, but go ahead, Jamie.
I just have like housekeeping questions, I guess. So is the motion still on the table for what you proposed?
There's an amendment to the amendment on the discussion.
You seconded it.
Yeah.
I know I
Yes.
did. I just was like trying to remember
We're a couple
Robert's rules
we're a
and
couple
like.
layers down in discussion now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, question for you guys. At what point could we put another motion down to have legal consider, like, because I feel like we're having two conversations here, which is like the free of, and then I feel like Alex and Peter and Kyle all brought up can we add the take into consideration, where it's not like a hard, so could we logistically, from your point of view, board chair, have legal look into two options for amendments?
We just need to have another motion at the right time, and I think we should,
Okay.
get to, get back a level, I think, at least before we make another motion that's kind of related to things a few levels back. So keep your thoughts on that, and maybe even if you want to preview, I think everyone understands what she said, but we can come back to that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Go ahead, Bree.
Wordsmithing here, because that's what I do.
It's another motion?
Nope. When I look at these words, which if we put it into policy, has to be followed by the superintendent and is enacted through the procedures, we need to make sure that we are choosing the words wisely so they can be put into practice appropriately. Because that's where the community then will say, I don't like this. That's when they're going to come and do a reconsideration. So we do need to make sure that we are choosing the words correctly here at this point. That's where I feel these two amendments are around words. Which words do we add in? Which words do we not maybe fully add in? So if you will, for just a moment, think with me of what the word explicit means. We all know what sexual means, so I won't need to go into any definition for that. It means something is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. Synonyms, in case that's not clear enough to you. Clear, direct, obvious. That term alone simply says that in a health classroom, because we're still talking about curriculum, not library materials, curriculum. So I'll go back to classes like science, health, because this policy will be enforced by the superintendent for all content areas of any grade level. You're telling me then that the drawing of male or female images, which are clear, in detail, leaving no room for confusion, I know what that is showing to my 6th grader who is learning about growth and puberty, right? Like that is clear, it's direct, it's obvious. That's what the word explicit means. Now go with me now to the word obscene, which is in the second amendment of not including the sexually explicit and vulgar, but just putting in the word obscene. Obscene goes deeper. That is the portrayal / description of sexual matters, not just a drawing of male or female body parts, right? But going into the sexual matters that would be considered offensive. This is the definition: offensive or disgusting by accepted standards of morality and decency. I think we can all probably get around that word a little bit more at the heart of the matter. It's a little bit redundant in my point of view because the synonyms for obscene are pornography, which is already, as we've said already, like an illegal thing. Like none of the curriculum is going to be written based on the standards to have pornography in it. And again, I'll just echo what Carrie keeps saying. When you have many eyes looking at curriculum coming in, it's not going to have pornography. But if you want to make sure that it absolutely 100% does not have pornography, we can put the word obscene in. But sexually explicit is not strong enough of a word, in my opinion. I feel like you're going to be saying that you can't have these images whatsoever because they're clear, there's no confusion. That's a penis, those are breasts, that's a vagina. Like, those are clear and obvious. That's not sexually explicit, though. That's part of the health curriculum. Obscene, maybe it takes it to that level.
Thank you, Bree. I shared some of this in the curriculum and policy subcommittee meeting, but I think it's helpful to reiterate some of it now. And that was that when I was a senior, I had a senior project that was focused on a series of novels written by John Irving. That was what I spent my entire honors English class doing, my entire senior year. And books, this is a book title called The Hotel New Hampshire, which absolutely has things that could be argued to be sexually explicit. When you get into The World According to Garp, I'm willing to bet some people would argue that there is vulgarity in that book. I don't think anyone is going to argue that those books are obscene. someone might want to argue it, but it wouldn't fit the definition. But what I'm trying to say here is that I would not have been able to do that project. I would not have been able to engage in my senior project as a deep dive into John Irving's works had this type of language been in the policy. And that is a shame. And I think the problem with these words is that they can capture things we're not trying to get them to capture. I understand, like I said to Anthony, I understand what you are trying to get at by putting these words in, but it's what are the implications that you aren't trying to get at that these words have. We have to use common sense. I've heard that a few times. Common sense, right? That's exactly what this policy is trying to do by bringing in people's common sense judgment, by adding additional people to look at these materials and to make these decisions. More review, more common sense, okay? I can just not support, not because I don't want sexual material in our schools. So I've been accused of that a few times by saying that I don't want to add in sexually explicit or vulgar, as if I would want those things in our schools. It's obviously not the case. It's just the implications of those words are going to capture things that we're not trying to capture. And I don't feel the same way about the word obscene. So that's just why I've chosen the motion in this way, and why I think even though legal counsel is not something that Peter wants to go after all the time, I do think as a board representing the schools, we should at least get a legal opinion on the implications of the language. So I'll leave it at that. Anthony.
But we already have a legal opinion that very clearly states case law that affirms, the Supreme Court affirms local school districts' ability to restrict these materials. If you're getting hung up on sexually explicit, add the word prurient.
That's a synonym under obscene.
It is part of obscene. It is one of three components that something needs to have in order to meet the obscenity test. Something can be prurient and not be obscene. Kuniyoshi woodblock prints, famous Japanese artist, highly regarded in museums all over the world. He did erotic pictures. They are not obscene by that legal standard. They are prurient. So if you're concerned about, well, we can't have this in our health class, add the word prurient. I think you're not going to have science material that is going to be prurient. You just won't. So if that's what you require, someone feel free. I'll do it if necessary. I will amend the motion, the motion so that it is worded pruriently explicit sexual content. How about that?
Well, we're still on the amendment right now that I've proposed. So
This is
if we
the
want
third
to
one.
move on from this, if we want to move on from the current amendment on the floor, we can, if discussion on this amendment is done. People can continue to talk about it if they'd like, but go ahead.
I just, I think that if you remove, and Anthony's amendment was a while ago, but I think he had wording that it was shall. It was instruction, direct instruction. If you remove that, and like Kyle mentioned, you could put it into the take into consideration avenue. I don't think that anyone reasonably can say that what Bree had described would be removed from a sexual education classroom of high school seniors. Because you consider it for this classroom in question, and it would not meet an obscene or explicit or vulgar definition through discussion. Same goes for the John Irving novels. You're in a high school honors English class. There would be no argument in my mind that those books would have been considered vulgar or obscene. You were in honors English. You are 17 or 18 years old, and they depicted, I've not read the books, but they were low on the threshold. So I think it's not disingenuous, but I don't think it's appropriate to say that you wouldn't have had access to those books if this wording gets put in, if it is in the consideration lane. And I think that's the better way to do it, because when you're talking about committees and groups and discussions, to try through words to expressly direct them, you're putting them in a box that is contradictory to discussion. So I just think that that's the route that I see this being most effective, and I don't see a negative to it, to be honest.
I just would like to know, since we can make all of the rules and guidance and everything under the sun, but there's only, I would, if possible, and if they're willing, like to hear from administration on your thoughts on the aspect of the guidance. You know, you're the ones that we look at to enforce these policies. So does it still become, you know, detriment to us operating the school with, you know, the options of putting it under consideration? Would, for example, the books that are being talked about, you know, what, you know, you've seen this come, you know, we look for you to operate the school under our guidance, so is this still hamstringing you, or is this, the way I look at it is we're looking to make sure that our administrators and the selection teams take at least a look and deeper consideration of the material before they move forward with it, with this in their mindset, not to x-ray it because it has bad words in it. So, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but sorry.
This entire process puts me on the spot, Peter, so we're way past that. So, again, we're not talking about the library, but I have to bring that in because we've put this new procedure in place for the library. And it is, in my view, achieving what people want. And I think I have put so much time and energy into trying to figure out a way to legally and constitutionally get at what people's concerns have been, right? And I do think that it's really important to recognize that if we think everybody's concerns are exactly the same, like we are, like for you, Anthony, for example, to say, I'm talking about X-rated material, okay.
500 people.
No. I'm just talking about your language, right? So as somebody who's going to try and figure this out and work with it. So we've talked about, you know, what sexually explicit means. So you have said here that I'm talking about X-rated material. That's not the word that's here, but that's how you've interpreted that. But I know we've heard other public comment that is not that definition of sexually explicit. So I think we're trying to figure out a way to like pull all this and put some walls around it and like make it clear. And there's just, in my view, there's literally no way to do that. But I do think, and I provided you with information about how that process has been working at the high school, and specifically how that collaborative process that now would have oversight if we approved this policy, how that changes the dynamic of the selection process. And it absolutely changes the dynamic of the selection process. And I think that is 100% what everybody's trying to get at. I do think we had plenty of public comment of people concerned that we would potentially be removing material, right? I can remember somebody last year saying, like, I always let my kids read freely. It seemed to suit them well, right? And that is, a whole pile of parents are gonna let their kids read freely, they're not gonna monitor, and then we have a whole pile of parents who are gonna monitor, and then a gazillion people in the middle, right? There is no way that we're gonna get words in my opinion, I don't know how we put words in the selection criteria that gets that span. I don't know how we do it. I do think, and I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm gonna keep doing it. I do think that broad selection process is gonna get as close as we're gonna get to trying to satisfy that range. I think if we go too far in one direction or the other, we're gonna get in trouble. If we say we don't care what kids read, put anything you want in the library. We can't do that. Like, that's crazy. But then to say there's this whole category of things that we're not going to have in the library, I think that's as equally problematic. And I think that's what we're wrestling with. We're trying to make something black and white that will never be black and white. But lots of brains working on this and making judgments is how we sort of navigate through this. That is what I believe, because, and I said this to Anthony at one point, I think it would be a mistake to assume that our staff has a monolithic point of view, like that they all think the same way about books or about material or about things that are taught. I wouldn't, and you've been at the high school, you work in other high schools, I've worked at, it would be a mistake to assume that that group of teachers and administrators who would weigh in on this all are approaching it from the exact same point of view. They're not, because that's just not how they are as humans. So I think the information I got from Eben about the library selection material process speaks to that.
To go back to my question, do you think this would restrict?
I would not recommend it. I don't see how those words help me, help the administrators enforce this policy. Because taking into consider age levels, okay, so we've got second graders, third graders, fifth graders, like, because that's the work that we do, right? Like, we're trying to figure out what makes sense for different age levels. Their maturity, so we all know a fifth grader here and a fifth grader there, not the same maturity. I think those are things that teachers are doing all the time. Varied interests, that's another way that we are always trying to engage kids in reading. If we think kid's a sport kid, like, let's get them books that are about sports. Like, those are things we do every day. These words have become political, and that is not something that teachers are used to doing every day. And so I think that's where I struggle in trying to figure that out. I just giving you the honest.
No,
like,
that's all
I got.
That's all I can ask.
Right?
I really appreciate the fact that we're able to discuss this so freely and at length. I really do appreciate that, Joe. I understand what you're talking about, Carrie, but I must disagree because your staff does it every single day because the policy requires them to. The dress code policy forbids students to wear sexually explicit material. Our policy, which we consulted with our building administrators on about the sharing of non-school materials, prohibits sexually explicit material. Our computer use policy, as we have said, for both staff and students, prohibits sexually explicit material. You cannot tell me that the teachers are looking at their computer and thinking, oh, I don't know what to do. Is this sexually explicit? I'm not really sure. Of course they do. So please, can we stop pretending that this is not the case? Our teachers understand because they must, because our policies require them to. All this would do would align this policy with other policies. And nobody has actually answered my question about what would we do in that thought experiment. Our computer use policy does not allow them to work with that curriculum because it says any use involving these materials. So, I mean, it just seems like, and if we want to talk about wordsmithing, don't use, if you really object to sexually explicit, we have other words at our disposal. It could be gratuitous, right? Gratuitous sexual content. How about that? I mean, there are ways around this that we can satisfy the broad support for restricting sexually explicit content and yet provide our faculty all of the resources they need to provide our children a robust education. And it is our duty, and this is something else that I'm just going to hammer, it is our responsibility to set the standards for our instructional materials. It is to say that we're going to punt it over to somebody else who because they run some kind of curriculum business, oh, they know, they're the experts. I do not believe in trusting the experts implicitly. If I go to the doctor, I do research ahead of time so that I can speak to my doctor intelligently. If I'm told to get a medical procedure, I talk to the doctor who's going to perform that procedure to make sure he's not going to cut off my left foot because he's actually the doctor who's supposed to be in the next ER, right? We do this every day. It is our job to set the standards for this district. It is not our job to delegate that to someone else. And it's definitely not our job to create this weird cycle where we say, well, we trust the teachers. The teachers don't work for us. They work for Carrie. Carrie works for us. And so we evaluate Carrie on how the curriculum is being effectively administered. But it's this weird cycle where actually nobody is actually kind of responsible. It's just bizarre. So we need to set the standards. And to say that these terminologies are simply too slippery to grab a hold of, I guess we're just going to have to revise these other policies too and strike those words because they're in other policies. These exact terms, and in fact, much more subjective ones than the ones that I have proposed.
I think trying to conflate our internet use policy and our materials policy is like a convenient way for you to argue your point, but like kind of a false comparison. And I say that from the standpoint of, we have a situation where we have all our students surfing the internet, and we are not in a place where we can kind of curate that internet. You know, we don't have teachers necessarily developing a school use internet system for them to use. And we have like software filters that need to be able to act binarily, you know, this is either good or this is bad. And so it's not that the terms are too slippery to talk about, but I think we have an acceptable level of overcorrection perhaps on internet use and attire. For example, I don't know what people are wearing these days, but when I was in high school, it was Big Johnson shirts and co-ed naked shirts, right? I mean, that's what, like, people were constantly trying to wear those to school, and they'd be taken off. I think I was probably guilty of that at least once. But those are obviously sexually explicit, and I don't think there was like a situation where there was Japanese erotic art on a t-shirt that someone was trying to wear to school, and even if there was, and I say that because that was the book that you brought into subcommittee the other day. You know, even if there was, there's this sense of no one is seeking out that material. It is something that someone is kind of advertising on themselves, and something that there needs to be kind of quick decisions made by, you know, the assistant principal, say, to make it clear to students what is or is not acceptable for them to wear into the school or for them to see on the internet. And there's not confusion about what those terms are, but there's this acceptable level of exclusion of things because the internet is so wide and because attire can be so much different. So, and let me finish. And that's very different when we're talking about selection of library materials, when we're talking about trained librarians, we're talking about our building administrators, and we're talking in this particular situation with curriculum, with team leaders and with whomever. There's multiple levels of trained staff that we're relying on to review this, use thought, and make judgment. Use common sense. I've heard that so many times. Use common sense. okay? Not one-off judgments about someone's t-shirt or someone triggering an internet filter or some other type of thing. So I don't think they're comparable at all. And I think that I'm going to continue to go back to the use of those words being something that in our curriculum, which is very well thought out, and in our library policy, we haven't got there yet, maybe we will, is very problematic because those words will be interpreted differently by different people. It's not clear, and it is something that will deter materials that we actually have benefit for students to be in the libraries. Like I said about my senior project. They're too vague, and that, I think, what you want, you've said it a couple times, X-rated, you described an encounter, that is obscenity. And obscenity is what is I think what everyone really is trying to keep out of the curriculum and keep out of the library, and that's why I think this amendment is really attacking the root of the problem without having ambiguity.
Joe, the policy says not just surfing the internet. The policy says any use. This is for faculty. This is for our teachers, all of the staff. Any use involving materials that are obscene, pornographic, sexually explicit, or sexually suggestive. Any use. Presumably, that means teaching, sharing a document with a student, right? The idea that, so I work in the art world. I have for 30 years. I can tell you for absolute certain that there is a ton of material that does not meet the legal definition for obscenity, that is so sexually explicit that you would flip out if I tried to show it on camera. There's a well-known image by a gentleman named Robert Mapplethorpe where his entire forearm is thrust up somebody's rectum. This resides in museums around the world. You cannot say that it is obscene because it clearly has artistic value. It has been anointed into the world of art history. So to simply relegate, like, well, you know, that's just X-rated means obscene. No, it doesn't. Believe me. I work in this world. And
so anyone else have anything they'd like to add here? Go ahead.
So we have two amendments on the floor, so I'd just like to ask a clarifying question.
Yes.
What do we do
So, yeah.
about those?
If we're ready to, let's back up to make sure everyone's clear on where we're at, okay? There's a motion to acknowledge the first reading of policy IJJC. There's our curriculum policy, as well as its accompanying IJJCL, I believe. IJJCE. That was amended by Anthony to incorporate, and I don't know if you want to, if it's possible for you to read back exactly the language that he wanted to incorporate.
Okay. A motion was made by Anthony Shostak, seconded by Kyle Parrington, to amend policy IJJC as presented so that the word "or" is struck from letter K on page 2, add "shall be" in front of letter L, be affordable, also on page 2, move current letter L to M and substitute "shall be free of obscene, sexually explicit, or pervasively vulgar content where be affordable."
And so that is on the floor. Another amendment to that amendment. So
I would question that, actually. I just was.
Go ahead.
I almost want to think you have a competing amendment. So, because it's kind of, you almost made an, oh, Robert, I hate him.
Well, I amended it. I amended it to.
He left all.
Yeah, so I was trying to think how you would vote on it.
Well,
We have
Yes,
to vote on
you have
his
to vote
You
on
amendment.
have to
mine.
vote on his amendment, on the amendment, to move forward, which amendment you want to move forward with.
So,
And there's still a chance to make.
Oh, we can make all kinds
make
more amendments.
further
if you
amendments,
want.
right. So the amendment on the floor is to amend Anthony's language to strike M, and to add in language that is incorporating the term obscenity, which is straightforward and legal. But incorporate that with specifically recommended language considered by legal counsel. Yes, go ahead, Jamie.
I just want to clarify your amendment.
Yes.
Because if you're building off of Anthony's amendment, he turned that line into L.
So M was the money,
M is the shall be affordable.
yes.
So, I can tell you
Yes.
what I did.
Yes, yes, you're
So
right,
I
you're
didn't, in your
you're
amendment,
right.
Joe, I did not use lettering.
Yeah.
I used the exact wording that was in Anthony's and then put what you
but I-
wanted to substitute for wording to
You're right.
avoid
The intent is
additional
to
confusion.
continue on Anthony's amendment,
Yeah,
but I guess it would be to strike L
Yes.
and to replace that with a statement.
Brady.
I'm going to bring us back together here. I want to start off. How's it going over there? You doing good? All right. Very good.
We need a little.
I'm going to start off by making a motion to adjust our agenda and to push item 10.2.3, which is the first reading and acknowledgement of policy IJJL, selection of library materials, and IJJLE, citizens' request for reconsideration of library material form, to the end of our agenda, as well as to strike item 10.5, presentation by Superintendent Med on student behavior, which we will reschedule at a future meeting, and see how far we can get with some of these other critical items, and hopefully get back into item 10.2.3 by the end of the meeting, with the knowledge, folks, that 11 o'clock by policy we have to end. Okay, there's no voting past 11. 11 o'clock is it, so. Is there a second to that motion?
So move, second, whatever.
Peter, all those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. So with that, we're going to move on to item 10.3, which is the approval of addendum to Wright Pierce contract for the wastewater treatment plant. Is there a second to that? Is there that motion on the floor?
Sure.
By Crystal, is there a second? Alex? Discussion around this. It might make sense for someone on PTV to explain what this amendment is.
I don't want to say the words, is that still on?
Yes.
And yeah, just as a side note, the OWL has a 3-hour timer on it. So we got most of that discussion, but I think we lost the last half hour before recess. About 9:30 it cut out, but it's back on now. And we're going to continue to roll here. So good experiment. We know now that it ends after 3 hours and we have to restart it. So.
And somebody stole my,
There's a lot of piles here, Peter, I understand.
oh, no, it's underneath everything. All right. So, the wastewater treatment plant, specifically the proposed change for, oh, is the exact number in front of me? It's
$56,000.
Is it even?
Yes,
Really?
it
That,
is.
don't you?
I do like the number.
So, that is broken down into a variety of areas. Since it has been a year or two since we originally proposed this, 12,000 of that is in new redesign issues. A lot of those redesign issues have come in place from the state making required changes in our plan of where we're going to put the lines. There is still some talk about potentially locations of the lines, but the state does not want the line to run down the middle of the road, which was the thought and the cheapest place to put it for some reason. So we're looking at other avenues, but for all that redesign is an extra $12,000. Hopefully it won't cost all that, but I suspect it will. The second is the current wastewater treatment facility, we will be demoing that building. There is, of course, when you demo a building of any certain age, there is a hazardous waste component that you have to evaluate. So that was not taken into consideration in the initial, so there's $7,500 for us to have the waste, that building examined, evaluated for asbestos and such. And I think I'm afraid to say that that doesn't cover removal.
No,
That's
that
just
was
evaluation.
A survey of the material.
Yes.
But that makes it so the bid is very clear on
Yeah.
what needs to be done.
So,
Yeah.
so it was just a side note, if they find it, God help us. Thirdly, this is the government at its finest. We were awarded a $600,000 grant, thank you, by the government to help take care of this project. To do the government paperwork is going to cost us $14,000. Because even though it was directed at us, there's still a whole bunch of paperwork, and we're not alone in this, I am told, even though I'm flabbergasted by it. So for us to accomplish the paperwork to get to $600,000, we have to pay a bunch of people $14,000. Fourthly, I get frustrated. There's a 7,000 and a 15. I'm looking to Gabby for help here.
Okay, so there's an additional $7,000 for permitting to conduct a wetlands delineation, which is directly related to a stormwater outlet structure for the new area that we're going to be putting in. The $15,000 is for additional fiscal sustainability work that needs to be done. The Maine DEP has requested that location and mapping of all the manholes be included in the fiscal sustainability plan, which was previously approved by the board, but an additional $15,000 is needed to include this new information, for a total of $56,000.
So I realize numbers I gave you don't quite add up to that, but so there's some adjustments there somewhere. Because
Right.
I have a 75, and that just
It's
doesn't
a
equal
seven.
out.
That's 7.
Oh, it's just straight 7,000 on 7,500?
Well, there's a $12,500 for the
Okay.
redesign of gravity sewer.
So okay. So
So-
it's, but regardless, it
It all
comes up
comes
to
to
56,000. The 15,000 we're suggesting that you put in, but we're in hopes that we requested that they reevaluate on how much that is required, or how much they just think is good for the district. So once we find out that, we might not have to spend all of that 15,000. But at this time, the subcommittee unanimously voted to support the 56,000.
Is there a motion?
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Oh, no, this is
No.
discussion of the motion.
Oh, sorry.
There was a motion by
This-
Crystal,
Oh, I
seconded
missed
by
it.
Alex.
Oh, I missed
Jesus.
that.
Yeah,
Oh, I
we're in
totally missed
discussion
that,
and Peter
sorry.
presented it, so
Sorry.
any
This
further,
is Peter presenting after 10.
any further discussion around the Wright Pierce amendment? Questions, PTB, anything you want to add, Alex or Kyle?
That's expensive.
Yeah.
Let's go.
You're not even getting anything
So
from
is that a
it.
yes
Yeah.
or
Just a bunch of
no?
paperwork.
Yeah,
We don't have a choice.
we have to keep moving quickly or we're going to lose all kinds of funding, so
Right.
we don't have much choice. All right, so seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the recommendation, it's unanimous, we shall move on. We then get to item 10.4, which is an update on the district ESA application from Assistant Superintendent Teresa Gillis, which will follow 10.4.1, which is a public comment period. We're going to reopen the public comment specifically for ESEA in a few minutes. I assume that you will explain more of that.
I
in
will
your
explain it,
presentation.
indeed. And if the audience members would like, I have extra copies, which Gabby is going to make available to you.
Would anyone like a copy?
We all had a handout, new handout.
And you, it was underneath your packet, and I realize our packets are somewhat in, maybe not in the same order, so I put it should be at the very bottom of your pile of things unless you rearrange them,
In this piece
which
of
it may be, sorry, yeah, sorry,
This
mine
doesn't
has
have
a
a
color.
color, yes.
Mine has a color because I need to see the difference.
Okay, go.
Okay, all right. So public schools receive funding from the federal government. I think you all realize that on an annual basis through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA. These funds are administered in different, what they call titles, which address different needs. A requirement of accepting these funds is to provide a public comment period for the public to make comments on how we use these funds. Typically in our district, this has been done by sending annual notifications to families through school messenger and posting information on our district website. This year, we're also providing an opportunity for public comment during a board meeting. So I'm going to take a few minutes to explain each of these titles to you. You can see what we have for funding in our current year, as well as our preliminary allocation for next year. And by that can change. We don't have final allocations yet. So we have 5 different titles. Title 1 is improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged. That's what it's called. And it's designed to provide all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. And you can see this current year, we received $365,418.91. And then you can see a reduction of around $30,000 for next year. Title II's mission is to prepare, train, and recruit high-quality teachers and principals. So this fund, this current year, we received $102,316.79. Now, the fun thing about this fund is that it can be transferred to other titles. So we chose to transfer this to either Title I or Title V. When the funds are moved, the rules for that title that you move them into transfer to the money you put in, so it just becomes one big pot. Title III is language instruction for English learners and immigrant students. We have not received Title III funds in many, many years. This year I was excited because we received a preliminary allocation of $893.43. However, there are so many stipulations on it that it would cost us about $10,000 to access this funding, so I'm opting not to receive that funding.
Good job.
Carrie and I talked about it briefly and made that determination. The stipulations include you have to belong to a cohort, you have to have an MOU with participating districts. It's a lot of work. Title IV's mission is to provide funding to improve students' academic achievement by increasing school district capacity and to improve school conditions and the use of technology. So this past year, the current year we're in, we received just under $40,000. We also opted to transfer this to either Title I or Title V. Our next year's allocation is pretty similar, just a couple $1,000s less. And then on the back side, Title V, our final title, is designed to address the unique needs of rural school districts. The great thing about Title V, and one of the reasons we transfer money to Title V, is you have a lot more flexibility in what you can do, and it can pay for things that normally would be in our school budget. So, but it can help offset that. Our current allocation is $13,000. Next year, we're down about $3,000 to just over $10,000. And then underneath that, the little chart that you see there, our current Title I projects. So we've transferred money from Title II and Title IV, we're only dealing with 2 title grants. Title I, there's a requirement that you set aside a specific amount of money for homeless and foster care. So one of the projects that I wrote is around that. Typically, we will help pay for transportation or supplies for students that need that. We are required to write a family engagement project, and then we have paid for the salaries of 7 ed tech salaries and benefits this past year, as well as instructional supplies for Tripp Middle School, Green Central School, and Leeds Central School, our 3 Title I schools for this current year. And under Title V, I wrote a communication project which covered the cost of Zoom subscriptions, school messenger, a crisis communication plan that Carrie may have talked to you a little bit about, more coming soon. It helps pay for professional development. Our budget does not contain funds at this point for teachers to go to conferences and principals. There may be a little bit, but not a lot. It's been pulled into Title V. Our MCLA membership, which is a membership that I participate in, and it gives us free access to some professional development for all staff.
That's Maine Curriculum Leaders Association.
Thank you. Student engagement and support is another project that we wrote, so we were able to purchase some STEM materials, some of the and we also have purchased some things for the high school for their robotics team. Student Data Privacy Alliance is something that Wally has talked to you about. We pay the subscription for that. Early Bird is a assessment that is it's considered a dyslexia screener, but what it does, and I think if you think back to when Kim Fuller was presenting, there was lots of blue and white, and then that number changed where the kids had made progress. That's what Early Bird is. We use it in kindergarten, and we've expanded to first grade to target specific skills that students need, and then as a result of that, we're able to provide them with instruction. And then Atlas, which is the platform that many of you saw introduced that we are using to house our curriculum. So that's what we came up with last year. We currently have 3 comments, I believe, have been submitted to my assistant Cassandra Roy. The message that went out to families as well as on the website said, send your public comments here. And so now we're going to move into the public comment period, and members of the public are allowed to offer suggestions for the use of these funds for consideration when I write the ESEA application and submit it. And the due date for that is August 1st.
Great.
So.
Before we go into that public comment period, does anyone from the board have questions for Teresa?
Well, sorry, Carrie pointed to me.
I did, I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
My arm just moved. I have no control over it.
It's okay if I speak.
Sorry.
Up.
So sorry.
Yeah.
It's late, we just want to move quickly. Well, I realize that we don't have many multilingual students in our district. We do have a few.
Yes.
So I just am wondering if we are not going to move forward. Obviously, that's wise. I would want to then assume, but I want to make like a clarification that students that would fall under the Title III, are they going to be serviced then under Title I? Like, can they fall into that? Because that is
Yes,
to
and
close
if-
educational achievement gaps, which could potentially be.
Yes, so our students that are classified as English language learners, if they meet the criteria to receive reading and math interventions and/or Title I, they get those. Any services they need are provided through either the general budget. I believe some of you might have noticed there was an increase in translation services.
Yes.
Those are required, and that happens in general budget. There's nothing that prohibits our English language learners from accessing any of our programs.
Peter.
Real quick, on all these numbers, our preliminary numbers, it says, are less than what we got last year. Is it normal for our preliminaries to be down, or is this an odd year and then sometimes it beefs up?
This is, since I've been in this position and been tracking it in 2018, this is the biggest decrease we've seen.
So the preliminaries
it's
are probably what we're gonna get.
Yeah, it's around 51,000. I mean, they may change it $100 here or there, but, yeah, it's down over $51,000.
Does this change, did we have this information prior?
Sorry.
No, I was just curious if we, I might have overlooked it. Did we have this prior to the budget? Or is this since the
No,
budget?
they came in late this year.
So how are we addressing it, considering?
We are going to have less money to spend, but we will pay salaries that are in the Title I. I think you mentioned, I think Carrie has mentioned that the instructional coach at Leeds Central School is in Title I, so we have to pay that person's salary. We know what that is now. And then we will pay 4 ed techs at Green Central School and 3 ed techs at Leeds Central School. And once we figure that out, we'll have to move enough into Title I to cover that and to cover our family engagement and our homeless project. And then we will need to see what funds we have left over.
And that'll be professional development is where we'll
Professional
spend less money
development
there.
will be spent, yeah, because we have to have, like some of those other things, we have to have our student data privacy agreement, so we'll just, it will hit professional development.
So we kind of juggle it in that area and we don't look to make it up out of the, okay. So I just was curious how we're trying to work with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kyle, and then we'll go to you, Kristen.
I'm good.
You're good, Crystal.
I just had a question about Title V and the unique needs of rural school districts and our stipends for like cross-country skiing or things that we were hoping to bring people in. Is that something that might be able to qualify You said it was a little bit more flexible, but I don't know if it's that flexible.
It is more flexible. The challenge, and Carrie and I have talked about this, whenever you put salaries into a grant and then you experience a cut of $50,000, it's less predictable. I wouldn't say it's totally off the table. I have not heard of stipends for extracurricular, but that doesn't mean, if it was something the board wished to pursue, I certainly could check with our regional director and find out what he says.
Anything further? Okay, seeing none, we are going to move into a public comment period here. Again, this is a public comment period that is specifically associated with public comment on the ESEA project, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act project. So no other comment will be received other than items very particular to this at this time. So noting that, we will now open up a public comment. Is there anybody who would like to add comment associated with the ESEA? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period and we shall move on. Thank you, Teresa. We have scratched 10.5 tonight, the presentation by Superintendent on student behavior, and we'll move on to the approval of the additional lead central school special education teacher functional support program. Is there a motion for that? We'll go with Bree, and seconded by Kyle, which brings us to a discussion period, and I think it'd be helpful for some updates from.
So I'm going to ask Rebecca to talk about why it's needed, and then I'll remind you, I'll do some financial stuff, so you just talk about why we need the position. Yeah, good. Come up because your voice is quiet. Yeah.
So I just want to remind the board that we start creating the budget I do for our department in November. And so part of that process is we project numbers for students that we already have in our district that might access our functional support program, which is K-6. They're the most, they have the most needs when you're looking at a student with an IEP plan. And so part of that process is we cannot account for students moving into the district. At that point, we don't have the numbers. We get the numbers in January, February, and March for students coming in through CDS. So what has happened this school year is that after we've done all the prepping and planning for the budget and the positions that we've had, we have had numerous students at the end of this winter into the spring be referred to the program that we have at Leeds due to their level of needs, meeting a criteria that we have set. We have students that have moved into the district that we were not aware that were coming, multiple students. And then we also have numerous students from CBS coming in as well. So when you're looking at, that's considered a self-contained program. And under the law, in what we MUSER, for special education, under the law, you can have 12 students for a case manager and 1 ed tech. We do have multiple ed techs in all of our self-contained programs, but it doesn't mean that with every additional ed tech, you get 5 more students, 5 more students, 5 more students. And so with this here, we analyze in November our caseloads and what we have. And so we have gone from 12 students, which falls in line of that teacher's capacity with that 1 ed tech. And now we're looking at this new school year, it's starting to build, so that next school year the program will have 17 or more students within the program needing services from our teacher and our ed techs. So then if we don't have another teacher, then we are out of compliance with our regulations that we are providing for students. So that's why I've come with the proposal. I've certainly talked to Carrie, I've been talking to Principal Bartash and the teachers there about what this means and how we can support our students and still remain in compliance.
So at the end of the budget process, like Rebecca and I started talking about this maybe mid-March, or towards the end of March, like, oh, I think we might have more kids. And so when you guys voted on the final budget at the beginning of April, and we had reduced all of, when we got the insurance numbers, we reduced all that. I don't know if you remember me saying, we left $60,000 in special ed warrant article because we thought this was coming. So we sort of left that budget with that money, knowing we were possibly going to do that. So now we're officially there. And so what this proposal does is request $15,000 from the special ed reserve account. Well, one, approve the position, but then two, to pay for it, because a new position is about $75,000, approve $15,000 to be spent from the reserve account to help make up for that, since we have the 60 in the budget.
Anyone else have questions on this? Jamie?
Can you remind me how much is in the reserve account?
100,000.
And we're gonna move 15,000 out of that.
Anyone else? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous.
And I should have asked prior, but I have. This is a new position starting, or are we going to try to fill it?
It'll be for next year.
Okay, so
For
we're not
next
talking
year.
about trying to get the last
No,
two?
no,
Yeah.
next year.
Okay. I didn't know if you had somebody lined up, or
Great.
No.
you hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, for hanging in there.
Yes, go home, Rebecca.
Why do you keep apologizing? We have to be here. You guys are way too nice to everybody else.
I have to
Make
show,
them
I
stay.
have to work with her in the morning. I'm gonna apologize. I'm gonna apologize.
That brings us on to some fairly important votes here to validate the budget referendum. So item 10.7.1 is a motion to approve that the computation and declaration of votes dated May 30th, 2024, and attached hereto be approved. And so I believe,
Yeah.
is that a motion from Kyle?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second? Jamie? Discussion. You'll notice that there is, in fact, a vote total in your packet, and we are looking to approve that computation. Is there any discussion around this? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous.
I might have doodled on my.
We'll do all of them and then we'll do circulate signatures.
Okay, that's fine.
Good.
Do you have an original of this one though that doesn't have the thing up top? I'll just white it out, it'll be fine.
Okay. Item 10.72 is to approve the computation and declaration of votes be entered upon the records of the Maine School Administrative District number 52. So Peter, second. Bree. Again, discussion here. We are entering the votes to our records. It's an interesting
All legally required.
arcane set of motions here. Any further discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. We'll move on to item 10.73 is to approve that a certified copy of the computation and declaration of votes be sent to each of the municipal clerks of the member municipalities within Maine School Administrative District number 52. Is that motion on the floor? Anthony, seconded by Kyle. Any discussion around that? All those in favor? It's unanimous. And my understanding is we need to sign this?
Yeah, but there's other things we need to sign, so
Yeah,
let's
so
do the
let's
last
do
one
the
first
last
and
one
then
Okay,
we'll do
so
signatures.
we'll get to item 10.8, which is the approval of the assessment to towns for 2024 and 2025. Is there a motion on the floor for that? Peter, seconded by Kyle.
So if we don't vote for this, we can't get our money, right?
Or we don't assess the towns, yeah. I
Yeah, it
guess.
is.
We don't send them the bill.
And then if we don't assess the towns, we don't get our subsidy from the state.
Yeah, so we'd
Which
be
means
really,
we're-
I have all the faith in you two making the magic.
Not that magic. That'd be legal magic.
How much
I will
is
not
on the
be making
district
any
credit
legal
card
magic.
anyway?
Not enough.
Just keep filling them out and then juggle them.
All right, the approval of the assessment of towns, I saw that come in our email. Is
Yeah.
that also here?
It's
Yeah.
that right there.
Okay.
Each town
Oh,
has its
yeah,
own
yeah,
document.
here it is, yeah, yeah.
It's very stimulating.
Great. Any further discussion around the assessment to towns? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? It is unanimous, and now we shall
Can everybody take out
sign
their
a
blue
series of
pens,
documents.
please?
This actually sped up everything.
Ooh, that's why you got a blue pen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug.
Yep.
We're
There's
taking
four
those pens
documents
back,
that need
we're giving them back to Doug.
Good luck,
What if I
Doug,
wanna
'cause
keep
mine's
that?
great.
On the same line.
That's for all the documents.
Have you been chewing on it?
Can you hurry up, please?
Ew,
I've
have
been
you?
writing a lot.
Do you think
Okay,
that
never
helps
mind.
you?
You win, you win. I'm not taking it.
Nailed.
We don't
Sand
like
packet.
me. You do too, so, you know, when you did it, I was like, hurry up.
It's such a good movie.
Wow, you guys have awesome signatures.
Wedding brochures.
Oh, that is good. I remember.
It's a painting.
Oh,
The painting was a gift to Todd.
What's this?
It's the same thing, just for another town. We're showing our age.
That's one of those ones you see on like.
And I signed every letter file.
21 years ago.
I've seen your signature.
It's rough. It gets worse as we get it. I do checks at work.
Yeah.
Hey, focus.
It's big.
And then you get to go home.
Gabby, I'm out of
I
ink.
have one more.
Are you really?
Gabby.
No, I'm kidding.
Still got one more.
Oh, really? So if we ask to get more pens?
Just 4.
But you,
Doug gave me 2 packages.
I'm almost tempted to bring out a black pen just to.
Anthony, you're gonna be the final stop, so don't
This is
lose
Doug.
anything. Anthony, do not lose anything, you're the final stop.
So what happens if we use a black pen?
Don't tempt me.
Okay, let's move on.
Bree used her own.
Oh, I
pen.
just irritated you?
Right off the
because it
bat.
was blue.
Right off the bat.
Did you?
Yeah, you can see a distinctly
But
different.
it was blue, Gabby.
Oh, it is. Oh, that's gonna kill her.
Yeah.
I lost my pen.
I've broken mine, I really don't like that.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, it's broken.
I have to dig it.
This is
Glad
the
they
pen
paid me
that
so
goes
much
to
money
the
to do this.
wall. This is like the- Sure. Darker.
No, that's just for your fire.
Make a motion.
yeah.
I like this setup, it feels,
It's spacious.
I like spacious.
Yeah, yeah,
You have a lot to spread
I know.
out too.
I do.
Well, you get more room in here. They're all similar. All right, we all executed?
Well, jeez, Joe. Really dark.
Are you really that mad?
Yeah. All right, so let's continue on, everyone. Jamie? You good? All right. We have about 25 minutes, and I'm gonna stop us just before 11, so we can talk about plans if we can't get through this. But I think we should try to at least start the discussion here and see where we go. And that is associated with the item 10.2.3, which is the first reading and acknowledgement of policy IJJL, selection of library materials, and IJJL-E, citizens' request for reconsideration of library material form. Is there a motion on the floor? Crystal, is there a second? Jamie. So we're starting discussion. I think we should, like we did before, quickly go around, table.
Is Carrie gonna give her?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I don't think we should cut any short ones.
We're not gonna cut any corners, and we're gonna let Carrie present. The
I'll
difference
try and be
is.
fast.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff that's similar, but there's some that's not.
It's important.
Yes, it is.
9 months out of your life.
You only worked 9 months
saying you-
on it.
It's not make jokes about that.
Exactly, this is a pregnancy, so.
This is pregnancy? This is your child.
Okay. On this one, because I thought this was the one we'd have lots of conversation on, so that's what I get for trying to guess at things. I sent you an annotated version of this that had comments next to it. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but I'm just going to point out some really specific things that were changed. So one,
this separated the policy between instructional materials and library, so this applies just to library. So these first two paragraphs here very clearly explain the purpose of the library, what the library is for, that the district has a position about the library and how important it is for the exchange of ideas and for students to be able to access information, critical thinking, respectful civil discourse. This is why the library exists. That was not in the original policy. It has a very different mission, which I think is really important. Selection materials, we just took out language about educational materials, and so it's just about the library. Selection criteria looks exactly the same as the one for the curriculum, instructional materials. All the major significant changes, and I'm just going to say this is a significant rewrite of this, significant. There's really, it hardly resembles the current policy. So I just want to say that clearly to make sure that people understand that that this is in response to the questions and concerns that people have had. And this is really all about the selection process. So for the selection procedure, so it clearly, what is here now is a clear statement about the continuous evaluation of the collection, how it's to be done, the method by which we are going to use, and that it gets done in consultation with administrators. And so that was not clearly stated in the original policy. It was happening, but it was not a statement, and it wasn't something sort of that I could identify as what was important. It wasn't, the consultation with administration was not in that, and I don't believe that was really happening prior to. And not for any reason other than just wasn't a part of the process. So before selecting materials for purchase, the professional staff evaluates the collection, consults with other staff members, reviews recommendations, considers reading level, all those things. So then, the process works like this. The librarian creates a list of materials. So this year we've piloted this at the high school only. But it will happen in all 6 buildings if this is the policy that we adopt. So we have experience. We were able to work through what this would look like in one library so that we can use that experience in the others. So the librarian creates a list of materials. They evaluate the existing collection, consult reputable, unbiased, professionally prepared selection aides and specialists from other departments. The list is submitted to the building principal for review. This has not been a part of the process. So the building principal will do that initial review. And I will say this is probably the hardest part from my conversations with Eben and Judith, because there's not much you can tell from a list, right? Like a title that grabs your attention, something like that. So some of that, they may take a second look at a title, but oftentimes it's sort of like that initial preview, and it's the okay for the librarian to go ahead and order the materials. And so Evan's provided me with some information about how this is working, so I'm gonna share that with you in a second once I get done. Once the order comes in, after the administration approval, the titles are reviewed by staff, including but not limited to library principal. So principal has to be involved in that. So oftentimes you might get a title and it on the surface looks good, the reviews seem good, and then you start opening the book and you're like, wait, what? This was not what I thought we purchased. This is something different, or this is not, this doesn't really match what I had in mind of why I thought this was going to be a good book. So sometimes you just got to dig into it because you don't know. Only after materials have been reviewed and approved through that process will they then be added to the collection. So Anthony had asked the question because in the committee we had talked about in the time that Eben and Judith have been working on this together, there have been 2 titles that have been ordered, reviewed, and not put on the shelves and not added to the collection. And so that
that is that process where if there's a final, like, you know what, we've now read through it and we're just not comfortable, we're just not gonna put it in. So it just never goes into the collection. It's not ever something anybody can search for, and it never becomes available for students. It doesn't go somewhere else in the building, like it's just not added in. I was hoping Evan would be able to be here tonight to talk about this. He's obviously not, so although by the time, he probably could get over here if I texted him. He's probably done, but anyway.
It started at 5.
So I just wanted to, he provided this, because I need you to understand sort of like how much time this takes, which is good time, because he's taking it seriously. I think everybody's taking it seriously. So prior to ordering, the librarian provides him with a list, provides me, I'm going to read it as if I'm Evan, provides me with a list of potential books, and in many cases, copies of book reviews. I then take the list and review the titles, check the recommended age levels and topics. In some cases, I'll pull up additional reviews and look those over as well. In the vast majority of cases, books are then ordered. In a few cases, there have been books that required further discussion. In those cases, we talked further, gather more information. At that point, we either haven't ordered the book, or we've ordered the book knowing that we'll need to look at it one more time, right? So they either say, we're not even going to order it, or, okay, we'll order it, but we got to look at it, we got to put our eyes on it, we don't really know what's in it. When the book order arrives, librarian makes Evan aware, and the instructional coach at the high school participates in this process too, Alicia Sorois, and any other staff member who's interested makes everybody aware. At that point, Evan and Alicia coordinate a time to sit and review and literally put hands and eyes on every book. That's not to say we read every page, but we look closely at the summary, read a few pages. If there has been a book that we purchased knowing we had questions, we look at that one even more closely. I know both me and Alicia have read multiple books through this process. Looking to answer any questions that we have through this check-in process, I believe we've identified 2 to 3 books that didn't make it into the collection for one reason or another. It's 2, I gave you that number. Thinks it's a good process, time well spent, but let me be clear, it takes hours. So I think he just wanted to make sure everybody was clear that that it is not a simple process, but that it's a good process. So that's what it's looking like in practicality. See, the computer wants to go to bed too. Okay, so then, worn or missing materials get replaced. Library materials that do not meet the criteria for selection, the process shall be withdrawn. There was no statement in the current policy that says the current collection gets reviewed and in connection with the selection criteria, so that if it doesn't meet the selection criteria, it can be removed. There was no mechanism for that in the prior policy. It was not clear what that would be. Each school library shall be available on the district website for families to be able to access, students and staff. We did that last year. It was not in the policy. They were not all available on all the websites, so now they are for people to be able to look at them. It was not in policy prior to that. Donated materials, nothing different, have to follow the same criteria. Inspection of materials by parents. Student's parent can request, I'm looking to see if it has that same language either. Yeah. Provided with a reasonable time. So again, we can talk about that. That really isn't much different. Restricting access to libraries. So we started the opt-out process last year. That was not in policy. We just did that. There's been some, I know there's been a couple folks who've talked about, can we do an opt-in, right? So like restrict a certain list of books that parents have to give permission to. So for those, I think I answered Peter's question around this one. One, I think the question would be, how do we create that list of what would be considered that? But then 2, I went back to some of the legal guidance we'd gotten last year, and there is actually Supreme Court cases where a district has in this case it was Harry Potter, required an opt-in for Harry Potter books because there was concern about witchcraft, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that, it's unconstitutional. So I didn't remember that information when you had asked that question, Peter, so I wanted to make sure that I shared it tonight. Reconsideration process, significantly rewritten. very similar to the instructional materials one. A couple of things in response to people's concerns about the committee being biased. It does not allow anybody who is in the initial, so the initial meeting that would happen would include the librarian and an administrator. If the person after that meeting decides to file a reconsideration form, neither of those people can sit on the committee. I think there was lots of conversation last year around if the person who bought the book is on the committee, they can't be neutral, so they can't be on the committee, right? So it would have to be a different librarian from somewhere else in the district. It'd have to be a different administrator, not whatever administrator met with the librarian and the person with the question. There are now 2 community members on this. This came after a conversation with Anthony, you've expressed that tonight, concern about those community members. So we've added, there are now 2 community members. We've added, the timelines are all in here. They are the same timelines as the other reconsideration process for curriculum materials. I think the rest of it is actually the same. Let me just verify. And again, what I would emphasize that at every point in this policy, it is very clear in the reconsideration process that staff have the authority at each step, if there's agreement, to remove material. That was very unclear. It was silent in the prior policy. So I think now it's very clear that there is that ability and license to do that. I think that's what I got. I think I hit the highlights.
All right. I was trying to just look up policy here. Phone service is not real good because I'm not so sure we have enough time to really thoughtfully engage in any kind of meaningful discussion between now and 11 o'clock. I think if there are any immediate questions for Carrie, I think we should ask them now. Otherwise, I think we should start a discussion of an additional meeting on our schedules, which might take us a few minutes to work out. So right now, why don't we see if there's any immediate questions for Carrie on that presentation.
Real quick, on the court case you brought up, do you know, was that, when you say Supreme, was that actually US or? And then my next question was that for minors or was it for just a general public?
It was a school library.
So it was a school
It was a
library
school
for
board.
minors?
It was a school board that did an opt-in for Harry Potter. And the Supreme Court said that basically they'd done it because of a viewpoint, like, because they didn't like the witchcraft that was in it. And I think the other piece, but I can get more details.
So you don't need to, I just was curious.
But it was a
if
school
did,
board.
You know, if it did take into account the minor compared to non-minor aspect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kyle.
How many books of, like, circulating every year? Like, is it 20? Is
From
it-
the library?
Yeah.
That's a fantastic question.
How many books?
Do you know how many books circulate from the library every year? Could you guess, or can we
Is
just
it
look it
10?
up?
Is it 100?
Oh, it's hundreds.
Is it really?
Hundreds. Oh, yeah.
Do you mean circulate actually you're taking out or circulate that you disposed of? What do you mean by
Oh.
circulate?
Well, I guess
I thought
what
you meant kids
new
checking.
coming in?
Oh,
Coming
new
in?
ones coming in?
Correct.
Oh,
Hundreds.
hundreds.
Okay.
If you, I mean, my
Is it
book
just the
budget is
high school?
$10,000.
That's just at the high school.
At the high school, my book budget is $10,000.
Okay.
At other schools, it's less than that.
Yeah.
And so if you figure an average cost of $20 a book.
But I can make sure, I can get that information for you.
I don't think I get 500 in a year, but it's, like, I'm putting together a book order right now for Evan to look through that's 200 and something books. And that's between $5,000 and $6,000.
Thank you.
I think I saw it. We'll go to Anthony quick. Yeah.
My question is about, is about the composition of the review committee. How would you feel about selecting those 2 members of the community in consultation with the complainant?
I think that's a substantive thing to discuss.
Fine.
So I think we should, I just want to punt
Yep.
that one. we will talk about that.
That's
Yeah.
fine,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
First, I found that it's Counts versus Cedarville, if you wanted to look
I believe, I just was curious.
And I just wanted to point out, to piggyback off of Carrie's, that one of the changes that we made in committee was in the opt-out form, one of the
thank you.
themes that came up again and again was the difficulty of listing specific text that you didn't want your child to take out. And it required titles, and so it now is changed so that the opt-out form says you can restrict based on subject or material. So you could even say like, I only want parental permission if my child takes out a book.
It's title or subject.
Yep, title or
Those are the two,
subject. Yep. So, so we did just widen that so that parents don't think they have to go through and cull the entire collection and say, I want these 550 titles, not, you can just list by subject if that's what you prefer.
Ashley?
Question on the donated materials, is it subject to review also, or is? so that
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
subject to
it,
the
because
same
it's coming, it could come from anywhere, you know, community members. Like, we had somebody stop by central office the other day and say, I have, you know, all these National Geographics, do you want them? Like,
So I guess, just to clarify, so it just says subject to, the same criteria, so it's subject to the same, the oversight process. It's not just one individual
Yeah.
looking at the criteria by themselves and saying, yes, it's gifted, but meets these. It's actually going through the whole review process.
That's the way we discussed it, and I think that's the intent, but I see what you're saying. If it's only referring to criteria and not the criteria and the process, I can see that being confusing.
yeah, we did talk about it as if it would go through the whole thing.
Or we might need to add verbiage to.
Yep, yep.
7 minutes.
I know. Okay, any more immediate questions to address the Carrie now? Okay. So I think we need another meeting beyond 13. It doesn't necessarily need to be beyond the 13th. I know the 14th is the last day of school. I know we just talked about maybe going to the 20th or something. I would like to try to find something sooner than that because I would like us to align with the school calendar, and I also don't want too much more time to pass before we continue this discussion. But I know that next Thursday is problematic for some. I'm wondering if next Tuesday or next Wednesday may be a possibility for folks. And I also don't know how much time we need to have before we advertise, and that was why I was trying to look up policy here, and I unfortunately can't.
So I think if it's a special meeting or something like that, it's as soon as possible, I think. But I wonder if it makes sense for like Martha to call everybody tomorrow with some dates to see where we get a quorum. Unless you want to try and do it right.
I would like to try to do it.
We're all right here.
Yeah, I would like to try to do it now.
Okay.
So that is, we can do this tentatively too, if we need to check with Martha or other people, but it's June 4th is next Tuesday and June 5th is next Wednesday. Just a straw poll here, no committal, but we'll do both the 4th and the 5th, like just a show of hands quickly. Is it possible to do the 4th? Just if you can do the 4th?
Carrie, 72 hours.
72?
For a special meeting, you have to give 72 hours notice to
Yeah,
the
so
public.
the 4th, I just wanted to double check that, I didn't really see.
The 4th will be hard for me.
Okay, so how about Wednesday the 5th, next week, Wednesday the 5th? So we don't have unanimous consent on this, which is challenging, because I don't think Mondays or Fridays are very good unless, we would struggle, we wouldn't have 72 business hours for Monday either.
Does it emphasize business?
It just says 72 total hours.
I will go back to it, hang on.
Well, let's just see, would Monday work for folks? It's just a show of hands on Monday.
Hold on.
Sure,
Is
yeah.
it June 3rd? Is that the
Correct.
Monday, June 3rd?
No,
Monday.
it just says 72 hours,
You're
it does
looking
not
for
say
unanimous
business hours.
Ashley's gone all week.
You're gone all week next week.
I don't return till the 10th.
So we need to decide how we're going to proceed. I don't think it makes sense to have a discussion on, say, the 11th, and then have a second reading on the 13th. So maybe we should be looking to extend another week into, you know, have our next regular meeting on the 13th like we've got scheduled, and then just go to another meeting on, say, the 20th, which is the following week.
So just to clarify, if we were to do that, then this would go to the third, would go to
We
the
have not issued
13th.
any agendas yet,
No,
so
but
yeah.
like, is that the order that you have to like write? Like, would we be looking to try to do the first read of this before doing approval of both of them on a
We
second read?
are
or are we gonna
effectively
split
going to
it?
end up having to recess this to the next meeting. Yeah,
Okay,
or
so we're not gonna
table
split
this
it.
to the
We're
next
not
meeting.
gonna-
Yeah.
We need to go in order.
Yeah.
And try to keep them together-ish.
We don't have to.
Why don't you want to do the 11th?
Well, that's what I'm saying, like, if
Why
we
do
were
we
to
want to
push
do the
this to
11th?
the
I didn't say
week
anything.
after,
Oh, I
then you
thought
have
you
to put your
said
second
that didn't make
reading.
any sense.
Because it was so
Oh,
close
oh,
to the
oh, I don't want to
13th
do
or something.
a first reading and then do a second reading on the 13th, especially if there's things that we're going to want
Oh,
reviewed
okay,
and have
yeah.
questions on between the 11th and 13th, it's only 2 days.
So are you suggesting putting this off until August?
No, the
No.
20th.
No, right now,
I think
I
we
see,
put it
we
in
can
July.
either schedule a meeting next week that not everyone will be here for, or we can extend a week beyond our schedule and go past the school year into June.
What does the 20th look like for people right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. How do people feel about the 20th? Is that a day that people could attend? Show of hands. It seems like everyone could.
All I know is I have no life apparently.
So,
It's Father-
yeah.
Father-
Even though I wish we could continue this discussion sooner, it seems like we're gonna potentially table this for 2 weeks. And
Well, are we table, or will this be, this discussion will probably be,
On the
oh,
13th.
yeah, in 2 weeks, sorry. The
On the
13th. Yeah,
13th.
we're skipping every 2 weeks now,
Yeah.
sorry.
So, I guess I'll put a motion on the floor right now to table our current motion,
So moved.
seconded by Kyle. All those in favor? Okay, was that Jamie?
I'm just abstaining.
All those opposed? Yeah. Were you abstaining then? Okay, one abstention? Okay, Jamie's abstaining. Okay, that's to tabling the motion.
I make a motion
It has
to
been
adjourn.
tabled. No.
Yeah,
I will not let anyone second that yet, because we have not decided on a schedule for the next meeting.
You can't really, because they decided to schedule, is that what you're talking about?
No, I think we should, motion to schedule another meeting on Thursday, June 20th. Anthony, is there a second?
Is that how we-
Alex?
What did we just do?
Okay, right now we have a discussion
Got it,
about
got it,
scheduling.
I'm good.
Okay, is there any discussion around the meeting on
Sorry,
the
I
20th
thought
of
we
June?
had done all that.
Okay, all those in favor? It is unanimous. Now,
Can I motion?
yes,
So we adjourn.
and second?
You have
Anthony?
8 seconds.
All those in
7
favor?
seconds.
Thank you very much, everyone.